With the Thom Hartmann University Book Club today, we're reading from Healing ADD. Richard Bandler, the founder of Neuro-Linguistic Programming, NLP, wrote the foreword for this book. And it's basically a book on NLP as applied to people with ADHD, but it's actually a pretty good book on NLP, which is actually how I originally wrote it. So we're on chapter 8 on page 80, Reconstructing the Past. Different types of memories, regardless of how anchored in reality or fantasy they may be, are stored in our brains in different ways. These forms of storage involve the 5 sensory modalities: sight, smell, hearing, taste, and feeling, and the subtle gradations of each sense, such as color, brightness, or contrast for the visual modality, for example. These gradations are referred to as submodalities. This is true for both adults and children. One of the ways our brain organizes information is according to the way it's stored. Our senses pick up something in the outside world. Say we see an insect fly by. That's an objective thing that we've seen. However, before that image makes its way to our conscious brain, it's processed by other parts of the mind and tweaked and tuned. If it's a bug that frightens us, perhaps a wasp, then the mind sees it as a bigger object and in sharper contrast than it really is. Other objects in the picture, the background, buildings, grass, whatever, become more distant, dull, perhaps even less colorful. The mind may increase the volume of the sound associated with the wasp and also attach a feeling to the image, probably a variation on what we might interpret as fear or panic, a feeling felt perhaps in the pit of the stomach or the trembling of the hands. So here's a quick list of some of the submodalities that we commonly use to experience reality and store memory. In the visual field, color or black and white. So this is how do you remember things visually? Color or black and white, contrast, size, bordered or not, moving or still, brightness, graininess, distance from us, associated or disassociated. In other words, do we see the scene as we saw it, or do we see ourselves in it? Focus, detail, texture, perspective, dimensionality, is it flat or 3D? Proportion, that's the visual field. In auditory, loudness, tonality, distance, pitch, melody, inflection, location, tempo, duration. Gustatory, salty, sweet, spicy, musty, bitter, familiar, delicate. Olfactory, strong, faint, intermittent, familiar, unique, musty, moist, damp, mildewy. Kinesthetic, the feeling. Hard, soft, cool, warm, sharp, electric, intensity, duration, speed, location. Now here's the amazing part. If you know what modalities and submodalities your mind uses to store a particular type of memory, happy, sad, hopeful, afraid, neutral, whatever kind of memory it is, then you can adjust the memories you have of the past to change their emotional feel. For example, think of a memory of something that you did in the recent past, such as brushing your teeth last night. Mentally list the qualities of the submodalities. Your list might look something like mine. I see a still picture in black and white without a lot of contrast or detail. Associated, I see the mirror in the sink, but not myself. No border, 3D, about 2 feet square, about 20 feet away from me. I can hear the sound of the water running and taste the mint of the toothpaste. If I concentrate on it, I can remember, or imagine remembering, the feeling of the toothbrush on my gum and the smell of the toothpaste. The feelings I associate with the memory are pretty neutral. Boredom might be the best way to describe it. It's something I do every night. Now imagine a control panel just below the image, or wherever you'd like it to be, with levers and dials that you can use to change the various submodalities. Reach out and change a few of the submodalities and see how things change. When I move the picture from black and white to color, I suddenly feel curious and interested in the process of brushing my teeth. It seems fascinating. If I turn up the volume, I become uneasy. As I increase the mint taste, I feel more awake. Nobody knows why this works the way it does. One theory is that the brain stores information holographically rather than digitally, so that the brain sees its own storage capacity as a 3-dimensional space. Because we experience the world through our senses, it makes sense that we could organize the mechanism for storing the information about our experience of the world along sensory lines as well. When something is put into a particular space, it acquires the sensory nature of that space, since sensory signals are how we experience the world. So when a memory is put into the boring category in our brain, it becomes, in my case, everybody's different, but it becomes for me black and white still pictures and all the other submodalities I described before. When the submodalities are adjusted and the pictures are turned into a color movie, it doesn't just change the memory. It actually causes us to interconnect with or slide to a different storage place, a physical different storage space in my holographic brain. There's also a concept known as a critical submodality. That's the submodality which has the ability to shift others, probably the primary hook into the place in the brain hologram where the memory is stored. As you're going through the various submodalities, changing each one a bit in one way or another, turning up or down the brightness, the volume, you'll notice that there's generally one particular one. It could be anything from volume to contrast to smell to brightness, anything. It causes the entire picture to change and creates a sudden shift in the feelings associated with that memory. That submodality shift is the critical submodality. And once you know what your critical submodalities are, you can do this process much quicker. One of the most common and most powerful critical submodalities is location. When you move a picture from where it is, for example, in front and to the right about 4 feet away to some other place, for example, in front and slightly over your eyes, only a foot away, it often changes dramatically its impact. So it goes from there to talk about how to take memories that bother you or that haunt you even and transform them into things that are simply just who cares memories. The book is Healing ADD, Simple Exercises That Will Change Your Daily Life.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Good afternoon, listeners. Welcome to the Thom Hartmann Program. I am Sam Sachs, filling in for Tom all day today. Thank you for tuning in. We are broadcasting on commercial radio stations from coast to coast on Sirius XM all across the North American continent, on Pacifica stations across America, Europe, and Africa, American Forces Radio on every U.S. military base in the world. That's a lot of them. On your electronic device via TuneIn, Progressive Voices, and the Thom Hartmann app, and simulcast as TV on both Dish Network, DirecTV, and cable systems nationwide. A lot of different places you can hear us. Wherever you're listening to us, thank you so much. We've got a packed show today. We're going to be talking about the big news of the day, reports that Trump is indeed going to pull the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Accord. Sayonara, the human species, am I right? Then later, we're also going to be having a little debate about net neutrality with our libertarian friend Charles Sauer. I will refrain from getting physical with him. And then we are going to be talking about the Trump budget and particularly its effects on energy efficiency programs. But before we get to all that, I've got a U.S. congressman on the line. Representative Mark Pocan represents Wisconsin's 2nd District. He was just newly elected to be co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. Congressman, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Sam. Glad to be here.
So the big news of the day, or what's coming out, is now Trump has been tweeting. He's kind of turned the fate of the planet into a reality TV show. He's been teasing that he's going to announce his decision on the Paris climate deal this week, but we're already seeing reports come out this morning that Trump is indeed going to withdraw the U.S. from the deal. It boded not so well when we got news from the press secretary yesterday that Trump was meeting with his EPA chief, Scott Pruitt, about the climate deal on Tuesday. Pruitt, of course, used to be the attorney general in Oklahoma, and he actually sued the EPA in the Clean Power Plan to get it eliminated. The Clean Power Plan is basically the linchpin by which the U.S. can fulfill its obligations under the Paris Climate Agreement. What's your take on this latest news of Trump really pulling the trigger and taking us out?
Well, if he indeed does this, we'll be joining, I think it's Syria and Nicaragua, in turning down this agreement, something that you've got over 190 nations working together. This is unprecedented to have, this much of the globe, this much of the planet working together, realizing climate change is a problem and that we're creating it, and we need to slow that down if we're going to have a planet. And for him to back off of this would truly be unprecedented. And all I can guess is he's done some calculation that some of his property will now be waterfront, so there's a benefit for him. I don't know, but it's truly a one more of those terrible indications that elections have consequences.
You mentioned that the U.S. would be joining Syria and Nicaragua as the only countries not in this deal at the moment. The deal is still going to go on. There are major countries that are obligated to this deal. They're going to do it. They're going to keep tweaking this deal. And the U.S. won't have a say in this at all moving forward if indeed we are pulled out of it. Beyond the fate of the planet, what does this say about U.S. leadership around the world?
Well, again, I mean, I think after watching the last international trip, and especially picking fights with Germany, and generally we don't pick fights with allies and partners like Germany, and yet we're watching them decide that they're going to have to move on their own in more and more deals because it appears that Donald Trump doesn't have their respect and is trying to make us too isolated from others, but. This is just completely the wrong direction, and I've got the feeling this is going to be one more nick to already an incredibly nicked presidency.
So I guess there's two questions. One, what role can Congress do here? And I guess that question's moot because you have Republicans in control of Congress, and they want to see the U.S. taken out of the climate deal as well. So what could Democrats in Congress do to, I guess, raise hell over Trump's decision here on the Paris climate deal?
I mean, we can continue to try to do what we do on many issues, right, which is create the awareness so people understand what that negative consequence will be. But, you're right. I mean, last week was a Republican member from Michigan who said, well, he believes there's climate change, he thinks God will take care of it. Well, that's pretty convenient, right? If God takes care of all of our problems, we don't need to get involved, I guess. And it's going to be, I think, difficult to see Congress take any serious action, even though there are some Republicans, I think, that won't agree with this. It'd be very difficult to get Paul Ryan to do much about it. So, we need to just realize that, again, elections have consequences. The people that we put in office, if they're doing things like this, that are going to negatively affect our children and our children's children, we are going to have to make sure that we're very aware and very ready for 2018.
Let me ask you a bit of a tough question here, Congressman. When we're talking about the Paris climate deal and Trump withdrawing from it, we're literally talking about the fate of the planet here. Last year, Democrats in the House staged a sit-in in the House chamber trying to force Republicans to bring a bill to vote on gun control legislation, the no-fly, no-buy bill. They kind of shut things down for a few days in the House. And the campaign went viral. A lot of people took note of what was happening. That was a time when Barack Obama was president. There was no real threat. It was a protest against lack of action on something. Here we have the Trump administration posing a much greater threat to working people, to the climate. We had the health care bill that passed the House. There wasn't a motion to recommit used there. Politico described the Democrat strategy as strategic retreat, kind of giving Republicans all the rope to hang themselves for the midterms with this bad legislation. But I wonder if Democrats should be doing more, sitting in, engaging in civil disobedience on Capitol Hill. I mean, there's plenty of citizens all around the country doing this stuff and getting arrested for it to resist Trump. Are House Democrats doing enough in this fight?
I think the thing that we're doing right now that I think makes a lot of sense to me, because let's face it, the rules are not set up for we can do a sit-in for a day and we've delayed action for a day, but they have plenty of hammers to come back to stop that. So what we're doing, and I think we're announcing it later today, I think we have about 27, 28 members, Democrats, from around the country going into Republican districts doing town halls. I'm doing one again tomorrow in Paul Ryan's district, since he won't talk to his constituents. Right now they're specifically centered around health care because of the health care bill and the budget, but other subjects will come up as they do other things. But this is really unprecedented to go into another member's district, and because they won't talk to their constituents, we will. I think this is the kind of activism, bringing it to their turf rather than just doing it inside the Beltway, because I think too much of what we do inside the Beltway doesn't get translated around the country. But it does get translated around the country when you have 20-plus members of Congress going into another district, being willing to talk about these issues so that they have to be held accountable where they grocery shop, where they may go to their place of worship, where their kids may play in sports. So I think this is a good new move that the Progressive Caucus has been working with Indivisible and the PCCC on, with Democratic leadership supporting what we're doing. You're going to have some real action happening.
It's remarkable to watch Republican members of Congress so fearful of their constituents. I just saw a story the other day with Darrell Issa retreated to the roof of his congressional office to avoid talking to the constituents below. Another big story is something that broke at the end of last week. The Washington Post reporting that Jared Kushner, close advisor to Trump in the White House, his son-in-law, wanted to establish a secret back channel communication with Russian officials. They wanted to use Russian technology to do this. It was discovered based on notes that Russian Ambassador Sergei Kislyak took back to the Kremlin about this. Now, on its surface, wanting to establish back-channel talks with Russians may not be nefarious. This is part of diplomacy. But given everything else that's going on in the context of what's happening, what disturbs you the most about this story?
Oh, wow, everything on multiple fronts. One, we have the president's son-in-law given, virtually every role in the world to seem to be in charge of, so obviously great confidence is put in him. And yet we've got, him not reporting multiple instances of meeting with Russian officials, which now he claims he doesn't remember, but at the same time, he's trying to set up back channels with the Russians. I mean, this is taking the main issue, which is the Russians interfered with our elections with the intent of electing Donald Trump, and that's not from me, that's from 17 intelligence agencies who put out a report, to now this new level of how complicit was the Trump campaign and perhaps the Trump family with what happened. This issue just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. So many of us have called for Jared Kushner's security clearances to be removed at this point. Clearly we have to figure out to what extent this was going, but every day we seem to get a little more information on this, and nothing makes me comfortable.
You noted at the top what a powerful position Kushner holds. I mean, as far as I can tell, this guy's not going to get fired. He's not going to step down. He's Trump's family. That in itself is problematic.
Absolutely, and when he ran a real estate company as a developer, maybe that's fine to have a tightly held company where your family are making all the decisions. But this is, the most powerful country on the planet and a real democracy, and yet we're operating in a way that seems to run very counter to what a democracy is.
Given how important the Russia story is, I mean, what the intelligence community has alleged about them hacking our elections and the connections we've seen between the Trump campaign and Russian officials. Clearly, this is an issue that's getting a lot of attention. I wonder if it's distracting any attention from some other issues. We had Jared Kushner, his sister promising visas for $500,000 investments in Kushner properties with the Chinese. We have Michael Flynn, a paid agent of the Turkish government, advising the Trump administration, plotting to kidnap U.S. citizens, advising against counter-terror missions at the behest of the Turkish government. Are those things getting lost with all the focus on Russia here?
Well, and don't forget the president still hasn't really separated himself from his business interests,
True.
So that becomes an issue no matter where we look. I think we can walk and chew gum, but I think in the case of the issue on Russian interference at the election, I mean, the level of what's happened is unprecedented, and I think that alone is a standalone issue, and there are many other issues, and there's a bad health care bill, there's a bad budget, and, I think like we saw in the campaign, there's so many bad things that came at once, sometimes it was hard to absorb them all, but I really feel on the Russian issue, you can't have another country interfering with your elections and then want to lift sanctions, and then if there is this collusion with the campaign, that really is in and of itself separate issue that an independent commission is necessary to take Congress out of this. Let us get back to the stuff, all the other stuff that we got to do. But this really does happen.
We'll take a quick break, Congressman. We'll take more of your we'll take some phone calls right after this.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Sorry to cut you off there. More with Congressman Pocan right after this. We've got some callers to take. Sorry to have to cut you off there, Congressman, as we were hitting that break there, but I just wanted to note that you mentioned the multitude of bad things that are happening, and sometimes I wonder whether that's a disadvantage to the Trump administration or an advantage, because it just it stops us from focusing on any one thing that could bring it down.
I agree, and we saw the same thing during the campaign.
Yeah. All right, let's go ahead and take some calls here. Dan, calling from California, Maryland, watching on Free Speech TV. Hey, Dan, what's up?
Hey, how are you doing?
Doing well. You're here with Congressman Pocan as well.
Cool. So I was just wondering, I'm not exactly completely clear on it, but what do we have in the works of making sure that Americans have health care, whether or not they can afford it? I think that's kind of an important issue. I'm sure you'd agree.
I would agree. Congressman?
Yeah, Dan. So, one thing we're doing right now is trying to fight the House Republican in the Trump administration bill that would take health care away from 23 million people and make older Americans pay up to 5 times more for it. We're doing our best to fight that. But, we understand right now the Affordable Care Act has made sure that 20 million people now have access. It's got, protections, or if you have a pre-existing condition, you can get insurance, et cetera, et cetera. We know we've got to refine that and do some improvements on it. But, I think the bigger context of all this whole debate has been bringing us back to a single-payer Medicare for all type system. And we had a press conference last week. John Conyers has a bill, and we have 111 sponsors, more than ever before. In fact, the 111th person was Representative Joe Crowley from New York signing on. And, and he's in leadership. He's a caucus chair for us. So when you look at that, I think what I'm seeing is, we're lifting this debate to the level we should have it lifted to, is that, health care should be a right for every American. And hopefully this will make it a reality, because we're going through this period where they're trying to take it away from so many people.
Thanks for the call, Dan. What do you think's responsible for this surge in a number of sponsorships for the single-payer health care bill that you mentioned? Is it the rise of Donald Trump and fear over health care? Was it Bernie Sanders run, a politician who brought it to the forefront, national stage, talking about single-payer health care, and happens to be one of the most popular politicians in the country as a result?
Yeah, it's a combination thereof. I mean, Bernie helped to make it an issue people talked about during the campaign. But I think this whole debate about taking away health insurance and, the problems that still exist through the Affordable Care Act that are correctable, but that they do exist, it's just making people look at health care in a different way and saying, maybe what we should do is just do the simplest thing that every other, democratic country just about has, from Canada to Europe, and that's having a system that works for everyone. And I think that has probably been a big boost. And quite honestly, people being more active than ever. I mean, the activism right now is really unprecedented, and they're reaching out asking us to do this. And I think all those things are having an effect.
Yeah, I've always kind of jokingly thought that, Republicans, you're not going to convince them on single-payer health care. They're in the pocket of the health insurance companies. They're not budging. But someone like Donald Trump might budge on this issue if enough pressure or enough compliments were showered on him, I suppose. I mean, he's the guy who in the past talked about single-payer health care during the Republican primary. He talked about not letting sick people die in the streets. Of course, that was all just campaign rhetoric at the time. But I wonder if there are buttons that can be pushed on Donald Trump to get him to come around on this issue.
Yeah, if he can make a profit off it, that'd be the button.
I bet that would. Okay, we're going to take another quick break. Congressman Mark Pocan sticking around with us. We're going to take a few more of your phone calls in just a little bit. And welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Sam Sachs, filling in for Thom Hartmann today, and we're joined by Congressman Mark Pocan, a Democrat from Wisconsin's 2nd District, the new co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. You can go to his website at pocan.house.gov, and you can follow him on Twitter at Rep. Mark Pocan. Let's take another call here. Russell, calling from Hickory Hills, Illinois. What's up, Russell?
Yeah, I got a couple of things real quick. How is Paul Ryan playing in your state? And the big one is, have you thought about running for Senate in 2022? I mean, look at our state. We had Kurt, and we primaried Tammy Duckworth, and look what happened. Now she's our senator. Have you ever thought of running for Senate in 2022?
Yeah, let me take the second one first. Generally, the way I've operated for 23 years is I don't necessarily think about the next office. You think about the one you're in and what you're doing. And I absolutely am so happy to be co-chair of the Progressive Caucus and the work that we do as 74 members of Congress. So that's what I'm focused on right now. To Paul Ryan, let me tell you this. So if there's another congressional district I know almost as well as my own, it's Paul's district. I grew up there. My mom and cousins live there. My classmates from high school live there. My husband's in-laws live there, his parents and other family members. I know the district well, and there just was a poll, and based on generic ballot, 46% said they'd support Paul Ryan, 48% said they'd support a Democrat. So Paul is in trouble, and every time he does a bill like that health care bill, there's 50,000 people estimated in his district, or 49,000 something, I want to be careful how I say it, that could lose health care because of that bill. He's got to be very careful because those aren't prescriptions for Wisconsin or for his district. Those are, neocon ideas that he's out putting forward, and he seems to now do whatever President Trump wants him to. Those are not good recipes for victory in his district in Wisconsin. So I would argue his agenda is putting him in trouble.
Seeing Paul Ryan run out of office would be an incredible development in this. Reminds me of Eric Cantor, although he lost to someone who was on the far right in the primary there. Let's listen to Stanley calling from Missoula, Montana, where they've got a new congressman up there. Hey, Stanley, real quick, what do you got?
Let me take you off speaker. Yeah, we have a new congressman. This is going to be a hoot in the future. I was going to ask, I personally believe that a single payer, it's a no-brainer, number one. I lived in Canada for 5 years.
Yeah, we've got just about 30 seconds, Stanley. If you could just get to your question for the congressman. Sorry about that.
Okay. The single payer is a no-brainer. The other question is, I think the Democrats and the corporate media need to get on the ball about voter suppression across this country and put an end to it. I don't know how to go about it. Thank you.
Congressman? Voter suppression.
Yep. The first one, I think we already said we agree on. To the second one, there is a lot going on around voter suppression and making sure that people have the right to vote. Regardless, Keith Ellison and I have introduced a constitutional amendment to guarantee a right to vote that we have the support of people like John Lewis on. So there are initiatives, but if the corporate media doesn't report them, you wouldn't know about it.
Yeah, and I don't want to get too hard on the corporate media for beating too much about Russia, because as you said, and as we've established, this is a very serious issue. But, I mean, how many votes were lost in the last election due to voter ID, due to cross-check, and due to other forms of voter suppression that might have changed the results?
Absolutely. Important issue.
Yep. Congressman Mark Pocan, Democrat, Wisconsin's 2nd District, the new co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, the best caucus on Capitol Hill. Keep up the good work up there, Congressman. We're relying on you.
Thank you very much, Sam.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And we'll be right back with more from the Thom Hartmann Program. We're going to talk about climate change, the big news of the day, also the Trump budget's assault on energy efficiency programs.
Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Rebooting the American Dream, 11 Ways to Rebuild Our Country, Chapter 4, An Informed and Educated Electorate. It opens with a quote from Thomas Jefferson. If a nation expects to be ignorant and free in a state of civilization, it expects what never was and never will be. Whenever the people are well informed, they can be trusted with their own government. That, whenever things get so far wrong as to attract their notice, they may be relied upon to set them right. Talk Media News Service, based here in Washington, D.C., is owned and run by my dear friend Ellen Ratner. Ellen is an experienced and accomplished journalist, and a large number of interns and young journalism school graduates get their feet wet in reporting by working with and for her. In March of 2010, I was in Washington for a meeting with a group of senators, and I needed a studio from which to do my radio and TV show. Ellen was gracious enough to offer me hers. I arrived as 3 of her interns were producing a panel discussion type of TV show for web distribution at talkmedianews.com, in which they were discussing their viewing audience, their recent experiences on Capitol Hill. One intern panelist related that a White House correspondent for one of the big 3 networks had told her that the network registered a huge amount of interest in a hot story that week of a congressman's sexual indiscretions. Far less popular were stories about the debates on health care, the conflicts in the Middle East, and even the Americans who had recently died in Iraq or Afghanistan. Quote, so that's the story they have to run with on the news, end quote, the intern said, relating the substance of the network correspondent's thoughts, because that's what the American people want to see. If the network doesn't give people what they want to see, viewers will tune away. The network won't get any ratings or revenues or viewers. The other two interns commiserated with the first about what a shame it was that Americans wanted the titillating stories instead of the substantive ones, but they accepted without question that the network was therefore obligated to give people what they want. When they finished their panel discussion, I asked these college students if they knew that there was a time in America when radio and television stations and networks broadcast the actual news instead of infotainment because the law required them to. None of them had any idea what I was talking about. They were mystified. Why would a station or network broadcast programs that were not popular or not what people wanted? But the reality is that from the 1920s, when radio really started to go big in the United States, until Reagan rolled it back in 1987, federal communications law required a certain amount of public service programming from radio and television stations as a condition of retaining their broadcast licenses. The agreement was basic and simple. In exchange for the media owners being granted an exclusive license from the Federal Communications Commission to use the airwaves owned by the public, they had to serve the public interest first. And only then could they go about the business of making money with the rest of their programming throughout the day. If they didn't do so, if they didn't serve the public interest, when it came time to renew their license, public groups and individuals could show up at a public hearing on the license renewal and argue for the license being denied. One small way the stations lived up to their public service mandate was by airing public service announcements, PSAs, for local nonprofit groups and community events and charitable causes. But they also had to abide by something called the Fairness Doctrine, which required them to air diverse points of view on controversial issues. Separately, during election campaigns, broadcasters had to abide by the equal time rule, which required them to provide equal airtime to rival candidates during an election. But the biggest way they proved that they were providing a public service and meeting the requirements of the Fairness Doctrine was by broadcasting the news, real news, actual news, local, national, and international news produced by professional old-school journalists. Because the news didn't draw huge ratings like entertainment shows, although tens of millions of Americans did watch it every night on TV and listen to it at the top of the hour on radio from coast to coast. And because real news is expensive to produce with bureaus and correspondents all over the world, news was a money loser for the big three TV networks and for most local and radio and TV stations. But it was such a sacred thing. That is, after all, the keystone that held together the station's license to broadcast and thus to do business. It didn't matter if the news lost money. It made all the other money-making things possible. Through much of the early 1970s, I worked in the newsroom of a radio station in Lansing, Michigan. It had been started and was then run by three local guys, an engineer, a salesman, and a radio broadcaster. They split up the responsibilities like you would expect, and all were around the building most days and would hang out from time to time with the on-air crew, all except the sales guy. I was forbidden from talking with him because I worked in news. There could be no hint, ever, anywhere, that our radio station had violated the FCC's programming in the public interest mandate by, for example, by going easy on an advertiser in a news story or promoting another advertiser in a different story. News had to be news, separate from profit and revenue, and if it wasn't, I'd be fired on the spot. News, in other words, was not part of the free market. It was part of our nation's intellectual commons and thus the price of the station's license. After Reagan blew up the Fairness Doctrine in 1987, two very interesting things happened. The first was the rise of right-wing hate speech talk radio, starting with Rush Limbaugh that very year. The second, which really stepped up fast after President Clinton signed the Telecommunications Act of 1996, which further deregulated the broadcast industry, was that the money-losing news divisions of the big three TV networks were taken under the wings of their entertainment divisions and wrung dry. Foreign bureaus were closed, reporters were fired, stories that promoted the wonders of advertisers or other countries like big movie production houses owned by the same mega corporations that own the networks began to appear, and investigative journalism that cast a bright light on corporate malfeasance vanished. So the chapter is an informed and educated electorate. It's about our media in rebooting the American dream. Hey, want to hear that clip again? Subscribe to the Thom Hartmann Program on YouTube to see all your favorite show highlights. You can support the Thom Hartmann Program and see video of our entire 3-hour show over at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann.
And welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Sam Sachs, filling in for Tom. Just a quick note about myself. I occasionally fill in, so a lot of you probably know who I am. For those of you who don't, I'm a lefty journalist based here in Washington, D.C. I co-run a news website called districtsentinel.com. We consider ourselves a watchdog news outlet covering the comings and goings of the federal government, Inspector General reports, watch oversight reports, those sort of things. We try and distill them in a way that's readable and give them to people so they know exactly how power is serving power here in Washington, D.C. We also, Tom just mentioned how you can support his Patreon. I also have a Patreon to fund our independent journalism operations. It's patreon.com/District Sentinel. You can become a subscriber and get access to a weekly podcast that we do featuring interviews with other journalists, activists, and newsmakers. And I also do a free nightly newscast that you can listen to. It's a podcast. You can subscribe on iTunes by searching for District Sentinel Radio. It's just a quick 15 to 20-minute newscast that you can download every night, Monday through Thursday night, and get caught up on the news of the day while you're commuting home or doing your dishes or whatever you do at night. So check that stuff out. It'll be good. Also, I just got an email here, interesting numbers from Public Citizen, and it's good just to remind everybody, you know, as I talked with Congressman Mark Pocan, there's so many things going on with Trump. The news is just every day, several times a day. It's hard to keep focused on what exactly is at stake with this guy in the White House. Public Citizen just put out a reminder to everybody that here we are, 131 days since Donald Trump took office. 23 million people stand to lose their health insurance under the Trump Care plan. $100 billion. That's how much money shareholders, the big banks, stand to gain from Trump's assault on Dodd-Frank and all other Wall Street reform regulations. We've got $5.5 trillion with a T. That's the estimated amount of Trump's proposed tax cuts for corporations and the super rich, somewhere between $5.5 trillion and $7 trillion. We've got 14. Those are the number of regulations. We're talking about environmental regulations, labor regulations, financial regulations that were approved of under the Obama administration and have since been completely repealed by the Republican Congress and Donald Trump. 14 of them. So I know a lot of people like to make hay saying that the Trump administration hasn't accomplished anything, that it's been crippled by its own scandals. Well, that's something. 14 different important regulations protecting our environment, protecting workers, protecting our markets have been taken away as a result of the Trump administration and working hand in hand with Republicans in Congress. And also this, 100%, that's how much of the budget for low-income household heating assistance is cut under Trump's proposal. These are programs that help low-income people heat their house in the winter so that they don't, freeze to death. That budget, their budget has been completely eliminated. We're going to get into a lot more talk about the Trump budget coming up at the top of the hour at 1 o'clock hour. We're gonna talk about specifically the budget's attack on energy efficiency programs. One of them being the Energy Star program. You probably have appliances at home that have a little Energy Star mark on them, sticker that connotes that the appliance is energy efficient. Well, that program, which has been really helpful for consumers and manufacturers, that thing could go by the wayside. We're going to talk about that in about 20 minutes, so stick around for that. Let's take a listener call while we're here. Got Michael calling from Saginaw, Michigan. Hey, Michael, what's up?
How you doing there? The reason why I brought up, I'm glad you was talking about the banks, about crony capitalism, too, because I think that all the people who own houses and own mortgages and things, what brought it to my attention was when they had the riot in Ferguson, Missouri, and they were showing that all the real estate firms from Warren Buffett, the Berkshire Hampshire Company own all the property. Not too many local people own their own property. It's like corporations are invested in the real estate and everything. And I just want somebody to really explain what that term is. I have to stay on the phone. I'm not listening to the radio now. Could you explain that for me? I appreciate it.
Well, the term crony capitalism basically applies, almost all capitalism, in my opinion, is crony capitalism. But essentially, the market, when you have purists talking about capitalism, the market is that the people who do better, who have the best goods, get it to market. There's a meritocracy. The people who perform better end up with the most wealth. Crony capitalism is when the government engages in the market and starts picking winners and losers, starts giving huge subsidies to oil companies. Oil companies get billions of dollars in tax subsidies every year. These are some of the most profitable companies in the history of the world, and they're not paying any taxes. They're getting money back when they should be paying taxes. So when we see all these laws passed that allow capitalists to make even more money through scheming and through other ways at the detriment of others, workers, small businesses, things like that, that is a good definition, I'd say, of crony capitalism. But thanks for the call, Mike, in Saginaw, Michigan. Dave calling from St. Louis, Missouri. Dave, you want to talk about Trump's effect on the stock market?
Yeah, I'm a small business owner, and honestly, I could not be more thrilled. My portfolio is looking fantastic, and I do employ upwards of 150 people, and things are going wonderfully for us.
Why do you think that is? I'm curious because after Trump was elected, the night he was elected, I remember we saw the markets around the world crashing. Everybody was freaking out that this is going to be the next crash right when the markets open after the election. But since then, we've seen the stock market go up to dizzying heights, and yet you hear banks and you hear a lot of the corporate America talk about how they love certainty. That certainty is what drives the markets up. There's been everything but certainty under this Trump administration so far. What do you think is driving this market rise?
That I really don't know, but I own Subway food franchises, fast food, and the employees here, our wages are far and above minimum wage. That's why I have a dedicated workforce, and I don't have folks that want to leave. We have folks that are making upwards of $15 an hour. So, I don't know what the reason for it is, but for our particular business and our part of the world, things are going wonderfully. Well, and I hope they continue to.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people do. Dave, thanks for the call. The unfortunate thing here is that the market going up doesn't necessarily bode well for everybody else. I mean, in Dave's case, he's made a good point here about how it helps his workers, but not everybody is invested in the market. In fact, the majority of Americans don't have any investments in the market. So when the market's going up, it's only helping a certain segment of people. It's not helping everybody else. So it's hard to determine economic growth and value based on where the market is at any given moment. I did have this conversation with a Wall Street reformer, Alexis Goldstein. She's been on lots of cable news channels. She's good on Twitter too. But she used to work on Wall Street. And she told me that there's this synergy between Wall Street and Trump in the senses they're both interested in short-term gains. They're both interested in short-term profits. That they don't care what's going to happen. But Trump right now is giving them he's getting rid of the Wall Street regulations. He's giving them what they want right now. And that's all they care about for the next quarter is that they're getting what they want. And that's why markets are going up, regardless of what sort of damage in the long term Trump might be doing to the U.S. economy. And as we talked about earlier, the planet. Bob's calling from Oceanside, New York. What's up, Bob?
Yeah, how you doing? I was wanting to call about this incurable disease called greed. You see, not only do some people, greed is the only thing they know, but not only do they have to have assets. Look, I have assets too, and I've worked all my life, and I worked hard, okay? But the point is that when you have to succeed in life to be able to look down, if you have to look down at other people, okay, to make your success, then you have a serious problem called greed, an incurable disease. A lot of people are going to lose their health care insurance, and they're going to die. But this disease called greed is far worse. What is your opinion?
I agree with you, Bob. Greed is bad. There used to be Tom's book he wrote, The Crash of 2016. There's a chapter in it about madness. And you could basically call greed madness. And it's a term that came out of the Great Depression and the last market crash when you saw, and it was, I think it was Galbraith who coined the term, when he was looking at the way investors were operating during the great crash in the 1920s, late 1920s, and he called it madness. People were acting out of their minds in the chase for money. You could say that was, people were buying property in Florida at the time. This was in the 1920s. It was boom property. Everybody was putting their life savings into buying property, and then a hurricane comes through and wipes everything out. Stuff people should have thought about, but they were consumed by the madness. And you saw the same thing in this kind of housing bubble that was built up in the 2000s, that people were operating under this assumption that housing prices were just going to keep going up and up and up and up and up. That's madness to believe that. And yet people believe that. So greed is a hell of a drug, I guess you can say. And we've seen its devastating effects on our economy over and over and over again. But the people who run our economy, the main people, the main players, I mean, you look at the fire economy, the insurance, real estate, and financial economy, F, financial, insurance, I, R, real estate, fire economy. It's like 25% of our economy. It's a huge chunk of our economy. To put that in perspective, back in the 70s, it used to be manufacturing that used to be about 25% of our economy. Now that's down to 10%. Meanwhile, fire is up to 25%. If you look at the people who are in charge of finance, insurance, real estate, they're the people who seem to be most susceptible to this concept of greed and can do the most damage because of the huge role they play in our economy. Thanks for the call, Bob. Interesting topic to bring up. Now we got John. John's calling from Macomb, Michigan. Hey, John, what's up?
Hey, how are you? And thanks for taking my call.
Doing well, thanks.
I just wanted to talk a little bit on this new budget they're trying to pass. To me, it kind of boils down to, either public welfare versus corporate welfare. And, to strip away the safety net for a lot of people just to give it away to greedy corporations. It's just that I think can be thrown in Republicans' faces, like, that they always are preaching holier than thou, but, they would throw people out and, mothers and children out in the street just to give money to their corporate cronies.
Yeah, John, and the White House is completely upfront about this. The budget director, Mick Mulvaney, has described this as the taxpayer's budget. And he means something very specific when he says that. It goes back to that right-wing meme from Mitt Romney when he was talking about how 47% don't pay taxes. This is a myth that Republicans continue to push. And while yes, it's true there are some Americans who don't make enough money to pay income taxes, they do pay all sorts of other taxes. They pay payroll taxes, they pay property taxes, they pay sales tax. So there's tons of taxes that everybody is paying. But there's this myth in the Republican Party that half the country is just moochers. The takers versus the makers, that they are the takers. But that's not true. They pay taxes, they contribute their fair share, plus the data, the 47% data, that comes from 2009. It was when the stimulus package was passed and it raised the threshold raised the threshold by which people had to pay certain taxes. So the numbers are artificially inflated on who isn't paying taxes to begin with. But you're absolutely right. The people who do pay taxes at the top end of the income spectrum, they're getting tons of welfare. I mentioned just with the other caller, the billions of dollars in tax subsidies that oil companies, the most profitable companies in the world, make. That's welfare. The tax loopholes for various investors on Wall Street that they don't have to pay because they're making money with money instead of making money with their hands. That is welfare. The contracts that go to defense companies, no bid that's welfare. There's tons of welfare that the rich get. And what we're talking about is minuscule amounts of assistance to people who need it most, the low-income energy assistance program. I mean, this is going to save lives. It's a drop in the bucket for how much our government spends on everything else. And yet we're getting rid of that because supposedly these people aren't taxpayers. So we don't need to benefit them. But they do pay taxes, whether it's, again, sales tax, income tax, property taxes, and payroll taxes. Everybody who is getting a paycheck pays payroll taxes. And in fact, working people and lower income people pay a much higher percentage of their pay in payroll taxes than rich people. And that's because of the Social Security tax is capped at like $112, $115, $125,000 or something. So rich people are only their work tax, their sales tax, whatever, their paycheck tax, I should say, payroll tax. Thank you, Troy. Their payroll tax only applies to their first $125,000. It doesn't apply over that. So they're paying a much smaller amount of their total income when it comes to taxes. To me, that's a form of welfare as well. So if we're going to start taking welfare off for the people who need it the most, let's take welfare off for the people who don't need it at all, like billionaires and giant oil companies. John, thanks for the call. You set me off there a little bit. I appreciate it. Okay, that music means we're going to take a quick break for a few minutes, but then I will be back. We'll take more of your calls. Plus, we're going to have a segment about the Trump budget and what it does to energy efficiency programs.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Call in 202-808-9925 if you want to talk to me. It's not Friday, but anything goes. I don't care.
Colorado. Hey, Jim, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching Free Speech TV. Excuse me.
Thank you for taking my call, Tom. You're a wonderful host and a credit to our country.
Thank you. I'm doing my best. What's up?
The Electoral College results, when it was announced, in the Senate with Biden presiding, what happened? They were supposed to, it's common knowledge that the House and the Senate, somebody from each side had to sign the objection. What happened? There was no Democratic senator that would sign the objection?
That's right. As far as I know. And the reason why was because there were the argument that was made on which that objection was based was that there were 50 electors who were disqualified for a variety of reasons. The main one being that they didn't live in the congressional district that they were representing to the Electoral College. And let's just say that a senator, let's say Bernie, got in there and signed that thing and said, yes, I object. And let's say that the Republican-controlled House and Senate said, okay, we'll have a debate on this. And they had a debate. And let's say that the Republicans decided, yeah, our 50 electors are screwed up. They're no good. You know what would happen? They would simply find 50 electors who were qualified. It would take them 25 minutes, and the vote would go ahead the same, and the Democrats would end up with a lot of egg on their face, and they would have pissed away a whole lot of political capital that could be used for other things. That's why that went down that way. I mean, there's no possible. At every step of the way, we've had these. Oh my God! Here's our last chance to stop Trump, right? If we can just talk the Electoral College voters out of voting, well, that throws it to the House. They elect Trump anyway. If we can just disqualify 50 electors because basically they were all technicalities. They were legitimate technicalities, and I think they were legitimately not qualified. But like I said, there's no shortage of electors from every county that they easily could have just slid in. I mean, the party's got thousands and thousands of members. Every step along the way, we've been just like hanging on to this desperate reed, and it's time to realize, for all of us to realize, that this guy is going to be in the White House, and it's and we need to start working on that and planning on that and planning strategies to fight basically insane policies that he's promoting. And frankly, oddly enough, trade is not one of them, although we'll see what the Republicans have to say about this. I mean, I'm half thinking that the Republicans might be the ones who are impeaching Trump rather than the Democrats, and that they'll do it because if he tries to keep his campaign promise not to touch Social Security, Medicare, or Medicaid, and if he tries to keep his campaign promise to basically go back to a tariff-based trade system and blow up these trade deals, which I doubt. I doubt he's going to do either one of those things. But if he decides to keep those campaign promises, my prediction is that his own party will impeach him, and that they'll impeach him over conflicts of interest with his own companies and things like that. And then what do we get? We get President Pence and Vice President Ryan. And then 4 years from now, Paul Ryan runs for president, and you get President Ryan. or at least he's running. I mean, that doesn't seem like a great outcome to me either. So I think that the thing to do is to pick the battles on specific issues where the American people are with us and just highlight the hell out of it, rather than just trying to desperately hold back something that's inevitable. Let's point out those areas where we actually, all agree. Democrats have been against free trade forever. Anyhow, Jim, thanks a lot for the call.
Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Sam Sachs, filling in for Tom. We're broadcasting out of Washington, D.C., downtown Washington, D.C. here. Let's take another call. Bruce, calling from Cotati, California. Hey, Bruce, what's up?
Hi. I was thinking, and I heard you speak of the Republican tax cut that they want to get, and you were tossing out the number trillion. How many trillions was that? I can't remember what the number was.
It's between $5.5 trillion to $7 trillion. That's how much the wealthiest and corporations stand to gain from Trump's tax cuts.
I know, and when you think about that amount of money, trillion, they've cheapened the word money, the value of money, by the way that they've been throwing these giant numbers around. And remember when Everett Dirksen said, $1 million here, $1 million there, pretty soon we're talking money. Now it's $1 trillion here, $1 trillion there.
Yeah.
And $1 trillion is a lot of money. It's a huge amount of money. So we're getting our money value cheapened in a way.
Yeah. At the same time, though, Bruce, the economy grows, populations grow, programs grow. So money just tends to increase. And, I just remember during the stimulus debate, when President Obama took office in 2009, mind you, we just had a market crash that blew a $4 trillion hole in the economy. And we needed a stimulus package to repair that hole in the economy. And yet it had to be pared down, the stimulus bill, because of the $1 trillion word. It was too toxic to have $1 trillion stimulus package. So it ended up being about, $700 to $800 billion. A third of it were tax cuts, a third of it was assistance to states, and another third was infrastructure spending. But now, the trillion doesn't mean anything. As you said, here we are, 8 years removed, and we're talking about $5 trillion, $7 trillion tax cuts for the rich and for wealthy corporations. It's just absolutely mind-blowing. Bruce, thanks so much for the call. We're going to take another quick break. After that, we're going to talk about Trump's budget and how it's destroying energy efficiency programs.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
balanced and authentic interpretation of the rule of law in America. However, just a few months before he was nominated by Nixon, Powell had written a memo to his good friend Eugene Sindor Jr., the director of the United States Chamber of Commerce at the time. And Powell's most indelible mark on our nation was not to be his 15-year tenure as a Supreme Court justice, but instead that memo, which served as a declaration of war, a war by the economic royalists against both democracy and what they saw as an overgrown middle class. It would be a final war, a bella omnium contra omnis, against everything the New Deal and the Great Society had accomplished. It wasn't until September 1972, 10 months after the Senate confirmed Powell, that the public first found out about the Powell memo. The actual document had the word confidential stamped on it, a sign that Powell himself hoped it would never see daylight outside of the rarefied circles of his rich friends. By then, however, it had already found its way to the desks of CEOs all across the nation and was, with millions in corporate and billionaire money, already being turned into real actions, policies, and institutions. During its investigation into Powell as part of the nomination process, the FBI never found the memo, but investigative journalist Jack Anderson did, and he exposed it in a September 28, 1972 column titled, "Powell's Lessons to Business Aired." Anderson wrote, shortly before his appointment to the Supreme Court, Justice Lewis F. Powell Jr. urged business leaders in a confidential memo to use the courts as a social, economic, and political instrument. Pointing out that the memo wasn't discovered until after Powell was confirmed by the Senate, Anderson wrote, senators never got a chance to ask Powell whether he might use his position on the Supreme Court to put his ideas into practice and to influence the court on behalf of business interests. This was an explosive charge being leveled at the nation's rookie Supreme Court justice, a man entrusted with interpreting our nation's laws with absolute impartiality. But Jack Anderson was no stranger to taking on American authority and no stranger to the consequences of his journalism. He'd exposed scandals from the Truman, Eisenhower, Nixon, and later the Reagan administrations. He was a true investigative journalist. In his report on the memo, Anderson wrote, Powell recommended a militant political action program ranging from the courts to the campuses. Powell's memo was both a direct response to Roosevelt's battle cry decades earlier and a response to the tumult of the 1960s. He wrote, quote, no thoughtful person can question that the American economic system is under broad attack, end quote. When Sindor and the Chamber received the Powell memo, corporations were growing tired of their second-class status in America. Even though the previous 40 years had been a time of great growth and strength for the American economy and America's middle-class workers, and a time of sure and steady increases in profits for corporations, CEOs felt something was missing. If they could only find a way to wiggle back into the people's minds who were just beginning to forget the Royalists' previous exploits in the 1920s that had crashed our economy, then they could get their tax cuts back. They could trash the burdensome regulations that were keeping the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the food we eat safe. And the banksters among them could inflate another massive economic bubble to make themselves all mind-bogglingly rich. It could, if done right, be a return to the Roaring '20s. But how could they do this? How could they convince Americans to take another shot at what was widely considered a dangerous free market ideology and economic framework, and that Americans once knew preceded every great crash and war? But Lewis Powell had an answer, and he reached out to the Chamber of Commerce, the hub of corporate power in America, with a strategy. As Powell wrote, strength lies in organization, in careful long-range planning and implementation, in consistency of action over an indefinite period of years, in the scale of financing available only through joint effort, and in the political power available only through unified action and national organizations. Thus, Powell said, the role of the National Chamber of Commerce is therefore vital. And out of the Powell memo came all these think tanks and judicial programs, college campus programs. He reshaped America, and it led directly to the Buckley versus Vallejo decision.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program, broadcasting on commercial radio stations coast to coast. We're here in Washington, D.C. I'm Sam Sachs, filling in for Tom today. Check out my website at districtsentinel.com and follow me on Twitter at Sam Sachs. You can tweet at me during the show, send questions, own me over something I said. I don't care. Just send me a tweet if you want. All right, I promised that we're going to talk about Trump's budget, and we are right now. Trump's assault on the planet is twofold. We talked in the first hour how reports are that he's going to withdraw the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Agreement. That doesn't bode well for the future of our planet. But then we also have the Trump budget, which it does a number to energy efficiency programs and other things that we're going to talk about right now. And joining me on the phone is Noah Horowitz. He's a senior scientist and director, the Center for Energy Efficiency Standards and Energy Transportation Program at the Natural Resources Defense Council, the NRDC. Noah, welcome to the show.
Nice to be here, Sam.
So many bad things to discuss in this Trump budget. Where do we start? Well, let's start with the energy efficiency programs. First up, the Energy Star labeling program. Listeners have probably seen this label on their refrigerator or washer or dryer or something, basically to prove that the appliance they're getting is indeed energy efficient. Trump's budget has a problem with this program, huh?
It's not just a problem. Excuse me, the proposed budget would zero out the Energy Star program. The program, as we know it, would receive $0 in the future and would go away. And that makes no sense at all. This is a voluntary labeling program that was actually started under President Bush, so there's been bipartisan support for this. And it's a really easy way for consumers to identify the more efficient model. And we'd have a lot of chaos if that went away.
And we've seen a group of retailers, manufacturers, builders all join together to write a letter to the administration advising them against getting rid of this program. Trump was a builder. He prides himself as a builder. I'm sure that during his time as a builder, he's come across in these various programs, this Energy Star program, and it's helped him figure out what he needs to build, what sort of appliances to install and things like this. That's why this doesn't seem to make sense here.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Manufacturers like LG and Whirlpool are on record as supporting the program. Leading builders, utilities across the country, environmentalists. When's the last time all those people have been on the same piece of paper? In fact, they've signed a letter, about 1,000 different organizations, urging Congress and the Trump administration to maintain this program and its budget. It's one of the most cost-effective private partnerships in history. And just a few numbers, if you will. The program costs about $60 million a year, yet delivers utility bill savings to the tune of $30 billion. So this is really, really cost-effective and a very effective and efficient program.
And this is just one component of the assault on energy efficiency within the Trump budget. We also just have the energy efficiency standards that are so important in lots of various sectors of our economy. Those two, whoever makes the office that makes these standards is going to be severely hampered by the Trump budget, right?
Yeah, the proposed Trump budget would cut the energy efficiency and renewables program by 70%. That's a lot more than a little haircut, right? And we have a minimum efficiency standard set by the Department of Energy, and this has been going on for 30 years, and this program was started by none other than President Reagan. So again, you see the bipartisan support here that's disintegrating for reasons that make us scratch our head. But just like we have minimum efficiency standards for cars, we have those for the refrigerator, clothes washer, dishwasher you might buy in your home. And we need these standards because when you look at a refrigerator, you can't tell by looking at it whether it's an energy hog or not. So these common sense standards are set by Department of Energy. And believe it or not, the average home will save about $500 a year on their utility bill due to the standards that have been set over time.
So you kind of touched on it there a little bit, but imagining these programs go away and the standards go away, that's going to make shopping for these appliances impossible or even perilous, to the sense that you might be buying an appliance that's going to cost you thousands of dollars more in the future because of its high energy costs.
Yeah, so there are two parts here. One, the DOE, Department of Energy, sets a floor to make sure all the products you buy are an efficient one. And Sam, have you ever had your water heater go out in the middle of the night?
I have not.
Well, many of your listeners have, and you're not the most popular person in the home. So what you do is you call the plumber, and they come the next day, hopefully, if you can find somebody that quickly. and you get whatever water heater's on the back of the truck. And there's a good chance that would be an inefficient one. And you're not saying, oh, could you tell me what the modified energy factor of this thing is? So that's why we need standards. Also, when people are living in a rental unit, is the landlord going to pay another $20 to buy the more efficient fridge, even though it saves you $100? Probably not. So that's why we need these standards. And if the Energy Star label goes away, how is this going to work? The Energy Star program is managed by the EPA. It has a lot of integrity and trust, and they're managing the program very well. If that goes away, it's going to be the Wild West. A lot of manufacturers are going to probably make exaggerated claims, and the consumer will suffer.
We've got another cut here, and this one seems particularly cruel. Trump's budget goes after the low-income weatherization program.
Yes, so zero seems to be the magic number when the people that put this draft budget together. So the low-income weatherization program would be zeroed out. Their budget would completely go away. And this is a program that helps low-income people heat their homes and stay comfortable. And it goes to pay for installing insulation or repairing broken windows so you're not freezing in the winter. And also it gives subsidies or grants to states to provide people relief on their utility bill. And why on earth would you do that?
So it seems like, I mean, this program specifically, obviously, since it's directly targeted at low-income Americans, but all of these cuts are the burden on them is going to fall so much on low-income Americans because they're the ones who have the most to lose here when they're trying to maintain efficiency, because that means more money in their pockets when that money's not going to the utility company, when they're shopping around for appliances, and here when they need to do some home improvements to make sure that their energy bills drop. All of these cuts are going to disproportionately harm low-income Americans, huh?
You're right. So the person that's getting a $50 or $100 or $200 utility bill, if you're low income, you can least afford to pay that. So you really benefit from that relief. And that landlord-tenant situation, disproportionate amount of low-income people are renters, and let's make sure they're not stuck with a energy-guzzling refrigerator or water heater.
And looking more out into the future, Trump's budget basically eviscerates research and development funding. That seems like something that's going to harm us not just today and tomorrow and the low-income Americans who are struggling to afford their energy bills, but way out in the future as we're trying to develop technology that's more energy efficient, particularly on a planet that's getting increasingly hotter.
Yes, and also the competitive economy that we live in. Mm-hmm. So one example, there's a program called ARPA-E. Sorry for the acronym. That's the Advanced Research Program for Energy that the Department of Energy manages. So the next generation of Windows, or making our data centers more efficient, or this program helped drive down the cost of solar panels. That research, that program is also zeroed out. Makes no sense, like you said. And this research encourages innovation and also develops jobs in the U.S. And this is completely counter to the Trump agenda of creating jobs and helping low-income consumers out.
It's fairly conventional wisdom here in Washington, D.C., that a president's budget is dead on arrival in Congress. After all, it's Congress that controls the purse strings. They're the ones who make budgets. We've had Republican senators like John McCain and Lindsey Graham say that the Trump budget is dead on arrival. But if you look at why they say it's dead on arrival, for McCain, he's upset that there's not enough defense spending in it. For Lindsey Graham, he's upset that the State Department has too many cuts. Neither of them seem to have problems with the assaults on the poor in the welfare state and the assault on these energy efficiency programs. So how receptive do you think the Republican Congress will be toward this specific aspect of the Trump budget that takes on a lot of these energy-saving programs?
These days, it's really hard to have a clear crystal ball, but the point you made earlier is this is simply a proposed budget, and many people have said it's dead on arrival. And we hope that's the case and that clearer heads prevail and that these very popular and successful programs are preserved. And we're not talking a lot of money here compared to a lot of the other line items. And this stuff is good for consumers. It's good for the environment. And businesses also support this program. So hopefully those voices will be heard loud and clear, and the people that are actually putting pen to paper on the budget do the right thing. And this stuff has historically been very supported on both sides of the aisle. Energy efficiency isn't a partisan issue. And as I mentioned earlier, both President Bush's and also President Reagan initiated some of the groundbreaking programs that we're talking about today.
For those listeners who are, a little bit shocked that the Energy Star program might actually disappear, that they're not going to have the information they need when they're going in to buy appliances, that the future of research to develop more energy efficient technology is in danger, that low-income Americans might not get the help they need to weatherize their homes. All the people who are concerned by these developments, what would you advise them to do to make their voices heard and get involved here?
You could go to our website, nrdc.org/defend, and there'll be a lot of information there. And the simple short answer is get involved, watch the budget process, reach out to your congresspeople and let them know you support the environment. You want to make sure that these programs and budgets for energy efficiency are preserved, and at minimum, keep the standards program and keep Energy Star going, and also these other programs as well, like low income and R&D. Don't give away all these successful programs.
Yeah, and we can call the Congressional Switchboard at 202-225-3121 or 202-224-3121. Raise some hell with your member of Congress. Noah Horowitz, Senior Scientist, Director, Center for Energy Efficiency Standards, Energy and Transportation Program at the NRDC. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Sam.
We'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I see we've got some callers lined up, ready to talk on the air. We'll get to those right after this break.
Number one, Emailgate is not the same as Watergate, which was actually a whole series of crimes, a major criminal conspiracy inside the White House by Richard Nixon. A continuation, in fact, as Lamar Waldron has talked about on this program, a continuation of criminal conspiracies that Nixon engaged in back in the late 50s when he was vice president. Taking bribes from the Dairy Association, screwing up the U.S. relationship with Cuba, on behalf of, or attempting to, on behalf of the casino and mafia millionaires down in Cuba, and his ties to the mob and everything. I mean, it was amazing, and that's why in 73, 74, 75, after the Church Commission and after Nixon's resignation in 75, and after all this stuff, that there were these new laws passed, right, to prevent this kind of thing. Laws that many of which have now been struck down by our U.S. Supreme Court, specifically by conservatives on the Supreme Court, who say that somehow criminal activity, that's a conservative value. Corporations swinging elections, rich people swinging elections, those are conservative values. These same conservatives who claim to be so religious. But you go to like Matthew 25, where Jesus is sitting there saying, and the disciples, they say to him, well, how do we get to heaven? And he says, in the last days, I'll be sitting there sorting the goats from the sheep. Right now, I mean, you can fill in your religion. There's stories like this in the Quran. There's stories like this in the Old Testament. There's stories like this in the Upanishads. There's the Gita, the Bhagavad Gita, you name it. He says, I'll be sitting there sorting the sheep from the goats, right? The sheep are going to heaven, the goats are going to hell. And I will say to the sheep, or I'll say to the goats, when I was thirsty, you didn't give me water. When I was hungry, you didn't feed me. When I was in prison, you didn't visit me. When I was naked, you didn't clothe me. When I was sick, you didn't heal me. Off to hell with you. And I'm going to say to the sheep, when I was thirsty, blah-de-blah, and you're going with me to heaven, to the sheep, who fed him when he was hungry. And the disciples freaked out because they were like, we've never seen you hungry. How do we get to heaven? We're screwed. We've never seen you sick. We've never seen you naked. We've never seen you, unintentionally, or, lacking clothing or shelter. We've never seen you thirsty or hungry. We've never seen, it's like, and you haven't been in prison. We haven't been able to visit you. How do we get to heaven? And Jesus, as you did to the least of these among you, you've done to me. This is like, Christianity 101, but it's also humanity 101. But that's not a conservative value, right? The conservative value, we should give health care to the children of poor people in red states. Expand Medicaid, so that the children of poor working people in the Republican-controlled states can have health care. Oh, no. That's not a conservative value. Let's try to have everybody in the country have health care. Nope, sorry, that's not a conservative value. Let's try to make sure that people have housing. No, that's not a conservative value. Let's do something about food stamps, all these other, but nope, sorry, that's not a conservative. Well, what the hell is a conservative value anymore? Other than money and power. Doing away with regulations so that petro-billionaires can make more money and giant corporations can poison our planet. What the hell happened?
Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Sam Sachs, filling in for Tom here on this Wednesday. A couple news items here. Yesterday, news broke that the laptop ban, remember the Department of Homeland Security imposed a ban on travelers from 8 majority Muslim nations from bringing their laptops and other larger devices on to their flights into the cabin. They have to stow their computers in the storage bin of the airplane, storage cargo area. There was talk over the weekend. The Department of Homeland Security Chief John Kelly said that he might extend that ban from those 8 majority Muslim nations to Europe as well. So anybody flying from Europe to the U.S. would also not be allowed to bring their laptop or other larger electronics onto their computers. But after a conference call with EU officials yesterday, that plan is on hold. It's not happening right now. The travel ban, laptop ban has not been extended to Europe. So now it's just discriminatory against Muslims from certain countries. There was some talk that maybe this is an anti-competition measure so that U.S. airliners have a leg up on other airliners because you'll be allowed to bring laptops on U.S. carriers, but not foreign carriers. I don't know. Is this more security theater? Is this something we need? Do we need to be blocked from bringing laptops onto planes now? As someone who doesn't handle flying well, I definitely wouldn't be able to handle it if I didn't have the distraction of my device in front of me as well. Give me a call. Let me know what you think. Also, we also had the communications director at the White House, Mike Dubke, resign yesterday. He's out. Pretty high-profile resignation. And Trump's been tweeting up a storm since then. In fact, yesterday he tweeted out a call to end the legislative filibuster to pass his tax cut and health care bill. I don't know. What do you guys think of that? Maybe that's something Democrats should have done when they had the majority in the House. All right, let's take a quick call here. We got about 2 minutes till the break. Omar calling from Herndon, Virginia, right down the street. Omar, what's up? Omar, are you there? And it looks like Omar is not there. Wait, Omar, are you there? All right, Omar, I'm dropping you. Last chance. Okay. All right, let's go to Rich. Rich is calling from Greenwood, Indiana. Hey, Rich.
Hey, man. Thanks for filling in for Tom.
Sure, happy to do it.
I wanted to give you a connection history with the Securing America's Future Energy Act, SAFE, if I'm remembering correctly, and it's Sheila Jackson Lee, and that's all about our Energy Star stuff. So, reach out to Sheila Jackson Lee and say, tell us what to do. I'm giving you a heads up on where Paul Ryan likely got his connection to Ayn Rand, of all things.
Oh, yeah?
There's been a revitalization of interest in Rush, the rock band. They were into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame last go-around. And Neil Peart is this amazing drummer who is known for his expertise and brilliance. And he's this drummer for Rush, and he read a couple of books by Ayn Rand. The one that he read first was The Fountainhead, and that was something that resonated with him because it's an architect fighting for his truest connection to creativity, as he's being battered by money forces. And that really resonated with Neil Peart because they were getting hammered by the record company at the time.
So maybe Paul Ryan is a fan of Rush, and that's how he got this. I've always found it creepy, Paul Ryan's obsession with Ayn Rand, but it does explain a lot about his political philosophy, which is just disturbing. We'll be right back after this break.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We've got a fiery debate coming up later in the show over net neutrality. You won't want to miss it. Stick around.
And welcome back to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from the Thom Hartmann Reader, which is excerpts from other books that I've written. This excerpt is from Threshold. And it starts out, we're on page 239. It starts out with, I went to Corral, Peru. It's a town that, or the first mother city, the first original city that has ever been discovered intact. It's 5,000 years old. It has been buried for 4,000 years. It was just excavated in the last decade. I went down to Peru. We did our radio show from there. And I met with Dr. Ruth Shady, who is the anthropologist and archaeologist who's running this. And she said, well, as we sat and ate, I asked her what was the most significant fact about Corral. Here, she said, the civilization was different, contrasting the Corral of 5,000 years ago with the city-states that were emerging in Egypt, India, and Asia at that time. The focus of the culture here was different. When this civilization was formed here, peace was very important. There was no war. She paused and looked at me with a glint in her eye. Why? Why was there no war? She asked as if quizzing me. It turns out they found this city that had been there for 1,000 years, and there wasn't a single instrument of war or violence anywhere in the city. Music, dancing, flutes, amphitheaters, no war. So then we jump to page 244. Are we innately evil or good, warlike or peaceful? In 1634, in his book Leviathan, Thomas Hobbes stated our culture's assumption of the essentially evil nature of humans, saying that life without the iron fist of church or state would be war of every man against every man, resulting in a society where life is poor, nasty, brutish, and short. A generation later, Jean-Jacques Rousseau and John Locke challenged Hobbes, suggesting that evidence from tribes being discovered across Africa and the Americas by European explorers demonstrated that instead, the natural state of humankind was good, egalitarian, and peaceful. The thinking of Rousseau and Locke explicitly and overtly influenced the founders of the United States, particularly Thomas Jefferson, who saw verification in it in his own contact with Native Americans. Thus began America as an egalitarian experiment, an experiment that has been expanded and developed by nearly 100 other nations in the world that claim democracy, particularly the countries of Northern Europe, where once feared and warlike people, most notably the Vikings of Norway and Sweden, are now among the happiest and most peaceful and self-sufficient people in the world. Yet the Hobbeses of the world are currently ascendant in terms of both war on humans and war on the environment. But what should be done? As I said in Leonardo DiCaprio's environmental documentary, The 11th Hour, the problem is not a problem of technology. The problem is not a problem of too much carbon dioxide. The problem is not a problem of global warming. The problem is not a problem of waste. All of those things are symptoms of the problem. The problem is the way that we are thinking. The problem is fundamentally a cultural problem. It's at the level of our culture that this illness is happening. In my books, I've shared stories from all around the world of cultures that have matured, awakened, and found ways to live in peace, harmony, and ecological balance, and the fate of others that have not. Some are pre-city, Aboriginal, and tribal people. Some are modern communities. Some are fully developed city-states moving quickly in the direction of peace. All offer us a new vision of how life can be in a world where the core assumptions of modern culture are challenged and modified. This is not a radical or new age or easily dismissed concept. It started with the Enlightenment of the 17th century. Its first experiment was the founding of the United States in the 18th century. Flawed, but a great experiment. It flowered throughout the world throughout the 19th century as nation after nation flipped from warrior king states to democracies. It found global acceptance in the 20th century with the foundation of the United Nations, the first international organization whose single explicit purpose was to create, promote, and maintain worldwide peace. And now in the 21st century, as war against both humans and against nature is increasingly being viewed with horror by people around the world, movements are springing up all over the planet to reject the immature cultural paradigms of the past and move us into a post-carbon, post-warfare, egalitarian, and peaceful world where there's room for both humans and for all other life. Then we start a chapter, why and when did war begin? If it's true, as scientists from Peter Farb to Rianne Eisler to Ruth Shady point out, that a prime differentiator between war societies and peaceful societies is the role of power relationships between men and women, the question is raised, why and when does war begin, and how is it related to the relationship between the sexes? Most pre-literate cultures, from those in the Arctic to those in the southernmost tips of South America and Africa, were largely peaceful before contact with technology and our culture. While there was conflict, and often violent conflict, it rarely reached the proportions of organized, sustained, legally sanctioned mass murder that we today refer to as war. As the anthropologist Peter Farb has documented, some Native American societies, for example, the Shoshone, didn't even have a word for war in their vocabulary. Others used organized games to resolve conflicts. Many theories have been put forward for how and why the warrior mentality took over. And then, it goes on to whether this started with animal husbandry or whether it started with agriculture, or where did war begin, and some interesting stuff. So it's in the Thom Hartmann Reader. Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Thom Hartmann Program still here with you from Washington, D.C. I'm Sam Sachs, filling in for Tom. Give us a call. You want to be on radio? Call 202-808-9925. If you have any questions or comments, we'll try and get to it. We got a story coming across over here that FBI Director James Comey will testify publicly as early as next week about his memos and Trump's attempts to thwart the various investigations into people affiliated with his campaign and administration. So that should be some must-see C-SPAN TV for everybody who enjoys watching C-SPAN as much as I do. I've always said there's this phrase that the cover-up is worse than the crime, and I usually think that phrase is somewhat meaningless. I mean, it refers usually to Watergate, in which case the crime itself was pretty bad, robbery, abuse of power, things like that. So the cover-up was equally as bad as the crime. And in most cases, I think that's usually the true. When you're covering up something, it's usually a pretty bad crime. When it comes to this stuff with James Comey, that phrase might actually be true. I mean, who knows what the Russia investigation is going to turn up? It might turn up that all we have here is Michael Flynn violating the Foreign Agents Registration Act by not filling out the proper paperwork, by not notifying people that he got 50 grand from RT, or that he was working as a paid operative of the Turkish government while he was advising the Trump campaign. So again, I don't want to prejudge this investigation, where it's going to all lead to, but regardless of the Russia probe, I feel that Trump has done enough to warrant impeachment proceedings. He has abused his power. He has impeded justice. There's more than enough evidence to follow up on that issue, regardless of where the Russia probe leads to. And that might all come out of what we hear from James Comey next week when he testifies on, as I said, must-see C-SPAN TV. All right, let's take another call here. Donald, calling from Aurora, Illinois. Hey, Donald, what's up?
Yes, hi, Sam. There's a lot of stuff going on about this here insurance policy that the Republicans want to put in. Now, I've mentioned it before, and Stephanie Miller, and so has another guy. And he feels, this other guy that mentioned it feels the same way I do. I think they should put it through. And the reason why I'm saying is I'm a Democrat, and it seems like most of the Republicans that this thing is going to hurt are, rather, most of the people that this is going to hurt is going to be the Republican Party, Republican voters. They never seem to pay a price for anything they do. They didn't pay the price when the Republican Party stuck us into 2 wars. They didn't pay the price when they shut down the government so they wouldn't subsidize President Obama's Obamacare. We're the ones that always suffer the consequences. It's about time that they suffer the consequences too. They walked up the steps of the gallows and they dragged us right along with them. It's only going to give me great pleasure to see these people go down in flames right along with us.
It's an interesting comment, Donald. And this has essentially been what the Democratic strategy has been in Congress. And I talked with Congressman Pocan a little bit about this in the first hour. You know, how are Democrats resisting the Trump agenda? Because when it came to the health care bill that the House passed a few weeks ago, or about a month ago or so, Politico characterized the Democratic strategy as strategic retreat. You know, they didn't try and jam up the process with a bunch of amendments. They didn't file a tough motion to recommit vote that would have forced Republicans into a tough vote before they passed health care. I used to work on the Hill in 2009, 2010, when Democrats were in the majority. You had Barack Obama as the Democratic president, and Republicans in the House, not just the Senate, but in the House, resorted to a lot of tactics to gum things up. And they were pretty successful. And we haven't seen Democrats really employ these strategies yet. And I think because their strategy is similar to what you said, Donald, let Republicans take their agenda, let them pass it, because it's going to be awful and it's going to harm a lot of people. You know, give them the rope to hang themselves, and then at the midterm elections, they'll suffer the consequences. Here's my concern about that strategy, though. The elections are rigged pretty much. And I don't mean this in kind of a Russia way or in a Trumpian way. We have voter ID laws that are proven, have been shown, that disproportionately affect Democratic voters. We've got cross-check, which has been talked about a lot. The work of investigative journalist Greg Palast has revealed a lot of information about cross-check and how it cast hundreds of thousands of people off the ballots before this last election. That might have been the thing that tipped the election to Donald Trump. We also have gerrymandering. So the congressional districts are drawn in such a way that even if Democratic candidates get 1 million more votes than Republican candidates in a midterm election, Republicans can still hold the House. The districts are redrawn that way. So I wouldn't put too much faith in just hoping for the best in 2018, letting Republicans hang themselves and hoping voters come along, because they have the voting system rigged too, to where they may not suffer the consequences at the polls. This is going to take, you know, engaging in politics. Democrats not just sitting on the sidelines letting Republicans do their thing. They're going to have to engage them on every issue and explain to voters why this is so important. But we'll see. I don't know. We'll see if this strategy works. I mean, given what Donald Trump and Republicans are doing, they might be stretching this so far that no matter how much the rules are rigged against Democrats, or no matter how incompetent the candidates Democrats might put up in 2018 might be, maybe they'll still succeed. So, interesting thing to talk about, you know, discussing strategy from the minority party here. We'll have to wait and see. I hate saying that, but in this case, we'll really have to wait and see.
They didn't do nothing when our presidencies have been stolen from Gore. They've been stolen from Kerry. The Democratic Party, they didn't do anything to the Republicans. They know about all this gerrymandering and all these shenanigans that they pull. They hardly come up to the podium to talk about it. And they better get off their rear ends and start backing us up.
Yeah, I mean, we've heard a lot of talk from Democrats about how Russia interfered in our election. And maybe they did. But the effect of Russian active measures on our campaign pale in comparison to the effect of Republican operatives, American citizen Republican operatives, passing legislation, enacting policies, creating cross-check like Chris Kobach did in Kansas, that had a very real tangible effect on the vote. It might have actually been the thing that gave Donald Trump the election this time. It's time we focus on it, because it's going to happen again in 2018. The Republicans are going to do it again. Chris Kobach is leading a commission in the Trump administration to justify. He's going to do all the research to justify more voter suppression measures by 2018. And then we're going to have 2020, and we're going to have the districts redrawn again. And if Republicans are still in control in a lot of these state legislatures by then, it's only going to get even worse, and it's going to last for another decade that we've seen here. Donald, thanks for the call. I really appreciate it. Let's go to Alexander calling from Portland, Oregon. Hey, Alexander, what's up?
Hey, what's going on?
Just hosting the radio show.
Okay, now it's more of a like making sure that you can hear me without going, can you hear me?
I got you.
Anyway.
We got you, Alexander.
Cool. So point being, there are a couple of things I want to talk about. First, I guess my bigger point in calling is kind of what we're talking about, which is kind of responses and considering what has happened during Obama's tenure as president versus what seems to be happening and strategies employed during Trump's tenure as president. Mm-hmm. And I seem to be hearing in general a lot of Republicans did all of these things while Obama was president, and Democrats don't really seem to be really willing to do the same things. Now, I'm speaking just outside this conversation. I'm not saying you are saying that or anyone here is saying that. And I guess the reason that I bring this up is I want to talk about something that's very common, and I get it, because during, you know what I'm saying, Obama's campaign and the subsequent presidency, there's a lot of like personal attack that came out, and a lot of things that had nothing to do with his presidency, and a lot of disrespect for the office of president, you know, and the idea of a president as chief citizen, as one of, you know what I'm saying, what it's like the 9 roles of the president, commander-in-chief, and the rest of that stuff. And so I see where it comes from. I think there are lots of things that's completely valid to, you know what I'm saying, make fun of Donald Trump for, or to kind of poke at Donald Trump about, that have nothing to do with his presidency. For instance, him getting Stone Cold Stunned on pro wrestling. That was great, can't lie. Anyway, to go on, I think one thing that happens a lot is that people want to paint him as mentally unstable, or as crazy, people will say, as not very intelligent. Words that people tend to use that I don't think in general should be used to describe people, because it assigns a certain thing to them. Talk about like dumb, idiot, you know what I'm saying, stuff like that. People will go as far as to use the R word, which I do not use in any circumstance. And so my issue is that these things seem righteous because we're talking about someone who has mocked disabled people, and we're talking about someone who has said so many horrible things about so many groups of people.
Yeah.
And so our tendency is to want to go, oh, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying. I think when you're discussing someone's mental health, it's always kind of a third rail. And, you know, sometimes it comes across like you're judging someone or reducing them. And look, we all have our own mental issues, mental health issues that we deal with. I don't think anybody is free from that sort of stuff. But when it comes to the president of the United States, who controls a nuclear arsenal that can destroy the world, I think these are very legitimate questions to bring up Trump's mental state. And there was just an article written in The Week. It's an online publication. I think it's also print, by Ryan Cooper, in which he questions Trump's mental health. I mean, he goes back and he watches old interviews of Trump and notices how much sharper his command of the English language was, and how it seems like a lot of his mental faculties have deteriorated since he's taken office. And we have past candidates for president who've had to answer mental health questions, Tom Eagleton, things like that. So I don't think this is off bounds, out of bounds to be questioning Trump's mental health. I actually think it's an important discussion that it's the elephant in the room for everybody. You know, is our president crazy? Let's talk about it. Thanks for the call, Alexander. I hear what you're saying.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We're going to take a short break, and then we're going to get an update on news around the world with Talk Media News.
Keep in mind, Donald Trump is basing most of his campaign on the fact that wages have been stagnant for 35 years. And he's saying it's because of Mexico. It's because of China. It's because of our trade deals. Well, to some extent it is, but it's also, and in fact, according to these guys at the Economic Policy Institute, largely because of the loss of unions in the United States, which is, the cornerstone of Reaganism. Destroy the unions, you destroy the funding mechanism for the Democratic Party, and they'll have to start getting in bed with banksters, which is exactly what happened. So anyhow, and so you would think that, if Trump really wants to restore the American dream and bring back the American prosperity we had in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, that he would be saying, hey, we need to go back to 35% unionization instead of the 6 or 7% we have right now in the private sector. Of course, he's not talking like that because he's a Republican. I mean, you just heard Harry Truman on this. So here are the key findings of the report. 1, for non-union private sector men, weekly wages would be an estimated 5% higher in 2013. This is the last year that they had numbers for that they could really crunch well. But it's, you can extrapolate it to today. For non-union private sector men, weekly wages would be an estimated 5% higher in 2013 if private sector union density remained at its 1979 level. For a year-round work, in other words, union density, number of people who are union members in the workforce. For a year-round worker, this translates to an annual wage loss of $2,700. For the 40 million non-union private sector men, the loss is equivalent to $2.1 billion fewer dollars in weekly paychecks, which represents an annual wage loss of $109 billion, just slightly more than the net wealth of the Koch brothers. I added. For non-union private sector men without a bachelor's degree or more education, non-college graduates, weekly wages would be an estimated 8% higher in 2013 if union density remained at its 1979 levels. For a year-round worker, this translates into an annual wage loss of over $3,000. And they continue through the list. It's taking out these various slices of people. The degree of non-union wage decline reflects how much unionization has declined since 1979 among private sector men by 2/3, from 34% to 10%. That 10% includes government employees. Among women by more than 1/3, from 16% to 6%. And especially among non-college degree men by more than 2/3, from 38% to 11%. As unions have receded from the private sector, their effect on the wages of non-members percent of unionization has declined. And this is they go through more of the details and all this stuff, but this is something I have been pointing out since we started this program 13 years ago, that for every good union job in an economy, there's always a parallel non-union job that basically has the same wages and benefits because the unions set the floor. And as you destroy the unions, you destroy the floor. And now working people in the United States are basically falling through the floor. Wages have been flat since Reaganomics really took hold in 82, 83, 84. And they've actually declined, in particular for non-college educated men and for women since that time.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Sam Sachs, filling in for Tom today. And now it's time to get an update on news going around the world with Talk Media News, brought to you by Goats for the Old Goat and Loving What You Do, The Elements of a Great Working Life, new book by Ellen Ratner, who is joining us now. Hi, Ellen.
Hi. So this is very interesting news because I am from the great state of Ohio. The Attorney General, who used to be the senator from Ohio, one of the senators, Mike DeWine, is actually suing five, and he's a Republican. He's suing 5 drug companies saying that they misrepresented the addictive risks of their pain-killing drugs. Now, I have not heard of 3 of the companies, but 2 of the companies, Janssen and Allergan, I know of. And it's really quite shocking that Mike DeWine, who's a Republican, would be suing the drug companies. But he is, which just goes to show you how great the state of Ohio is.
Have we seen similar efforts like this to hold drug companies accountable before?
Well, we have, but they've generally been done by Democratic attorney generals. We have not seen, to my knowledge, and there could be, so I might be wrong, but to my knowledge, there has not been a Republican attorney general in a state that has actually held the drug companies accountable.
And this sort of corresponds with a lot of criticism over the Trump budget, which reduces a lot of the funding for offices that respond to the opioid epidemic.
That's correct, but I actually know Mike DeWine. I like the guy, and of course, he's from the great state of Ohio. So
okay, we've established that the state of Ohio is great.
That's right.
What else is going on?
Okay, well, the Kabul deaths. This is from that truck that was not allowed into the green zone, but was able to really diminish the German embassy, which was right there on the corner. And, of course, there were lots of news organizations, as you enter, 80 deaths, over 340 people killed so far. Injured, not killed. 80 killed, 340 injured. Not good news in Kabul. It was stopped. The truck was stopped from going past what was the entrance to the green zone, which a lot of embassies are. We don't know about Americans. We've heard nothing at this point. Also, the VA secretary talked today at the White House. He wants to make it easier to terminate people. Now, he said that there was one psychologist who was viewing porn while talking to a patient, if you can believe it. It's hard to believe, and I used to be in mental health. But he wants it easier to terminate people. To me, honestly, even though it's done by a Trump administration, that does make some sense if that's the kind of people they want to terminate.
Now, this is the VA. He was the same VA secretary under Obama as well, correct?
Well, he was the VA secretary. He wasn't the VA secretary. He was the assistant secretary under Obama, and then he got made a VA secretary. And also, he said he is open to medical marijuana. Back to Kabul. We do know that one reporter and somebody driving a truck for BBC was killed, and we know that 4 BBC reporters were injured and 2 TV1 reporters were injured as well. Michael Cohen, who is the president's lawyer, said originally that he was not going to respond to the Senate request for him to produce documents, but he changed his mind. I wonder why. Maybe because some of the documents he needed to respond to would put in jeopardy his law license if he didn't. So we know that is happening.
And Michael Cohen, his name came up a lot in that controversial dossier, which a lot of the details have not been corroborated, but I mean, I haven't heard his name mentioned beyond, like, outside of that circle, and yet here he is getting subpoenaed on this stuff.
You can bet that the Democrats on that committee are going to take him up and down in all different sides. Now, he could plead the Fifth, but I don't think you want to be an attorney in pleading the Fifth.
No, that doesn't look good.
Okay, now, it's very interesting. The JFK papers will be released in a few months. There are 11% of the JFK papers that have not been released. And if I recall, and again, I have tried to look this up on the Internet. I cannot find any corroboration for this, but I was covering the White House at that time, and I recall that President Clinton actually continued to keep under wraps not just part of the JFK papers, but part of the Lincoln papers on the assassination.
Well, that's strange. I mean, I don't know how many conspiracy theorists there are around the Lincoln assassination, but it seems like that might be a move by Clinton to say, this is just with assassinations. We're not trying to hide anything here. We're just being universal here when it comes to the records.
Let's hope he's being universal, but we don't know because we haven't seen the papers. Okay, Michael Flynn, who, as you know, was a Trump employee for about 4 or 5 weeks. He agreed to hand over to the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence some materials around his businesses. Now, it's very interesting. He said he would plead the Fifth. However, I don't think your businesses are exempt from the Fifth. Now, it is true that the Supreme Court held that corporations are people, but I don't think on the Fifth Amendment they do. So I think he had to do that.
So are there any other documents he's still withholding, or is he being now fully compliant?
I have no idea. I mean, we don't know what he's withholding, and I'm sure we could ask the Senate committee. They may know some of that, but I certainly don't know any of that. Okay. The United Nations Secretary General on the climate deal, he said, get on board or get left behind, and clearly that was a message to Donald Trump. He is very clearly somebody who wants the climate deal to go through. As you know, the United Nations had a big hand in negotiating that under the previous Secretary General.
Has there been any confirmation yet from the White House that Trump is indeed withdrawing from the climate deal? I know he tweeted that his decision's coming out this week.
There has not been confirmation on that, and they say that there is some wiggle room in some of the language. So although he may say that he's out of the climate deal, he may not be. He may just do that to keep the people that voted for him happy, but he may not actually be out of the climate deal. The devil is in the details, and that's what we do not know. Okay, a couple other things. There is a group called the China Labor Watch, and they exist in New York City. Well, we do know that 2 people who were involved in the China Labor Watch in China have been disappeared. One has been arrested. This is the shoe company that also makes shoes for Ivanka Trump's line of shoes.
And people are looking into it, and they're being arrested or disappeared here. That's
right.
Disturbing news. Ellen Ratner with Talk Media News. Thanks for giving us the updates around the world.
You got it.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com.
And welcome back to Thom Hartmann University, the Thom Hartmann Book Club. Today we're reading from Attention Deficit Disorder, A Different Perception. I think it's the only book that I've written that Time Magazine has done a story on. This is, we're in chapter 14. Throughout the book, I explain the whole idea of hunters and farmers, that ADD characteristics are something that would help in a hunting-gathering society. They become a liability in an agricultural society. And so this chapter is titled The Edison Trait, Hunters Who Have Changed the World. Hunters sometimes have difficulty answering the question, what do you do for a living? It's not that there isn't an answer, there are too many answers. Hunters of above average or even genius intelligence often have resumes that are startling in their diversity and accomplishment, even though they may have struggled to simply finish high school. Similarly, the stereotype of the eccentric genius or loony creative type is often applied to hunter inventors, artists, writers, and designers. At many ad agencies, the creative types are allowed or even encouraged to have an eccentric appearance with flowered shirts, long hair, jeans, etc. As the chapter on ADD and creativity pointed out, the ability to think innovatively is intrinsically tied to the ability to fall into an open and therefore distractible state of consciousness, one of the characteristics of ADHD. Conversely, to make use of the inspirations gained from such typical hunter-free association, there must be a compensating burst of focused energy in order to bring these concepts into reality. Learning to channel these bursts is the challenge to every hunter. When hunters fail in life, it is often because their self-image was distorted in an early age when they were labeled as a problem. Their assets are also neglected if they plug into a job or a segment of society which requires farmer rather than hunter skills. But let's look at some successful hunters in history who have demonstrated tremendous powers of transformation, vitality, and dynamic energy, and whose biographies appear to conform to the American Psychiatric Association's DSM criteria of ADHD. While it's impossible for us to reach back to historic figures and ask them to answer the questions which might lead to a medically supportable diagnosis of ADHD, their life stories very often give us those answers in a rather overt fashion. Consider the following. The life of Thomas Alva Edison has been an inspiration to hunter boys for nearly a century. Born in the Midwest before the Civil War, Edison wrote, quote, "I remember I used never to be able to get along at school. I was always at the foot of the class. I used to feel that the teachers did not sympathize with me and that my father thought I was stupid." Edison complained about the distractions of the other children in his school and the fact that learning was abstract and not real. To be able to actually do something, to test a theory or discover a fact through experience, he wrote in his diary, quote, "for one instant was better than learning about something he had never seen for 2 hours," end quote. Believing her son had potential, Edison's mother took over his schooling. Instead of requiring her son to learn a particular curriculum by rote, she instead encouraged him to explore things he found interesting. He soon became a voracious reader and consumed a huge body of knowledge in a wide variety of subjects. Edison left home at the age of 12 and started a long procession of short-lived jobs. The year he was 17, he held 4 different jobs, being fired from each one because of his inattentiveness to the duties or routine of the job. When he was 15, he had a job as a railroad signalman during the night and had to clock in via telegraph every hour. He was fired when his superiors learned that his punctual check-in signal was actually transmitted by a simple invention he'd created from an alarm clock, which would send the Morse code signal on the hour. That invention led to his developing the first automatic telegraph and then the first stock ticker, although he held a dozen more jobs before he received $40,000 for his stock ticker at age 21 and was able to use that money to establish a laboratory where he could devote himself to inventing. Being a classic hunter, Edison usually worked on many projects at the same time. In the year of 1877, for example, we now know that he had more than 40 inventions in process in his laboratory concurrently. He kept his own hours, often working through the night. When he became bored or saturated with one invention, he would quickly hop to another. Edison credited his inability to stick to one task for a long time as being the power of his creative efforts. He wrote, quote, he said, quote, "Look, I start here with the intention of going there," drawing an imaginary line, "in an experiment, say, to increase the speed of the Atlantic cable. But when I've arrived part of the way in my straight line, I meet with a phenomena, and it leads me off in another direction to something totally unexpected," end of quote. Thomas Edison transformed the 20th century with his invention of the electric light bulb, the central power generating station, the phonograph, the flexible celluloid film and movie projector, the alkaline storage battery, and the microphone, merely a few of the more than 1,000 major patents he registered before his death in 1931. Benjamin Franklin flunked out of George Brownell's academy after only 2 years of formal education. It was said that he was slow at doing sums, math, and he utterly failed in arithmetic. His teacher complained that he would never pay attention to his lessons. He spent 2 years as an apprentice candlemaker to his father, but his father's frustrations with young Ben were legion. The boy was always slipping off to explore the town, the salt marshes, and the incoming ships. Having demonstrated his hunter inability to be a scholar in the formal farmer schools of the day, Franklin went on to become one of the most well-educated in terms of practical abilities men in American history. Although he couldn't stick with a single job, Franklin is now celebrated for his accomplishments in dozens of roles. He was a printer, moralist, civic leader, essayist, inventor, scientist, diplomat, publisher, statesman, postmaster, candlemaker, mechanic, and philosopher, among others. His impulsive streak, which was partially responsible for the creation of the United States of America, showed itself early when, at the age of 16, he wrote several articles for the Courant, a Boston newspaper making fun of Boston's authorities and society figures. Anyhow, the book is Attention Deficit Disorder, A Different Perception.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Yes, it is the Thom Hartmann Program, but I'm Sam Sachs, filling in for Thom Hartmann today. We've reached the third hour of the radio show today, which means it's time to fight. Joining me now is Charles Sauer, economist and president at the Market Institute. You also self-define as a libertarian.
I do.
That's good. You don't feel threatened to self-identify as a libertarian.
I might even self-identify as an objectivist.
What about the alt-right? What about alt-right?
I do not self-identify. I definitely come out against the alt-right.
So, have you used the internet at all today?
I have used the internet a few times today.
Multiple times. You're probably on the metro or whatever, on your phone, waiting around. When you were waiting around to come on the show, you were probably scrolling through Twitter or something on your phone.
That is true.
What's wrong with the internet as it is right now?
Well, there is $5.7 billion less invested in the internet last year than there was in 2014. So I'm not sure what is wrong with the internet now, but it's more than likely slower than it should be, and there's probably less infrastructure than there should be.
I don't know where you guys keep getting these numbers that investment is down. It's up 5.3%, $7.3 billion from 2014 to 2015. Telecom investment is going to go up $4.7 billion projected next year. They're still going up year after year after year. So
this is the left proving they still don't know how to talk about numbers, because 2015 is when the net neutrality regs went into place. The numbers that I'm using are 2014 and 2016, and they come from the Free State Institute, if you want to look them up.
Free State Institute, okay, and that's an institute funded by the telecom companies.
No, it's a Kansas think tank.
Okay, that has affiliated with ALEC and has been.
What are you getting your numbers from?
I'm getting my numbers
I
here.
think I see the Guardian.
I have lots of papers here that I am getting my numbers from, but we're still seeing tons of investment. AT&T had a cash flow of $16 billion here, $16.9 billion last year. I mean, isn't it AT&T's fault if they're not investing when they have $16.9 billion here that they're just sitting on playing with?
Now, I know that you are a very good host of a radio show, but now you're CEO of a telecom, and you know what their return needs to be. The return rates on telecom, I'm not sure what they are. The return rates when the left was attacking oil, the return rates were at like 4% or 3%. The return rates in like investment in Hollywood was like 30, 40, 50%. Talking about numbers like billions is just there to throw fear of these large profits at people using the term billions. But $16 billion might not be a lot if they're investing $100 billion or $1 trillion. I mean, you have to put those numbers into perspective. And the fact is that they're providing internet, which is helping provide work and increasing the value of people and their ability to find jobs.
If you're a company and you're deciding not to invest, even though you have the money to invest, indefinitely, I guess, not invest because you're mad about some regulation, isn't that your company's problem? I mean, how many people who are using the internet, who used it today like you, and have no problems with their actual interface? They can visit every website they want. It's all coming to them at the speeds that they want. They're not having to pay exclusively for certain traffic. Why do those people care about the investment, whether or not AT&T is deciding to invest or not, because they're mad about some regulation?
First off, let's pull this back a notch, because this is how the left likes to talk about business. And the fact is that we know one of the darlings of the left, President LBJ, actually made his fortune by getting the FCC not only to restrict radio in Texas, but then to continue to push people out of his way. The left likes using regulation to benefit their people. And we have a history of proof on that. And all that net neutrality, all that rolling net neutrality back to light touch regulation does is actually let people compete. And so it stops the government from being the arbiter.
But this is the state we live in right now. Net neutrality is in place right now. There is still tons of competition going on right now.
Less competition than there should be.
Okay. Assuming your numbers are correct.
And pre-net neutrality.
And still, investment is still going up year over year.
And I would say
since net neutrality.
Pre-net neutrality, Google entered the marketplace and started laying fiber in Kansas City. So even before net neutrality, we saw people that were frustrated with the market and saw an ability to enter it and did enter the market.
So let's take your example. Let's assume that we get rid of net neutrality and all these companies start investing again. But what they also do is they decide that they're going to create a tiered internet or a walled-off internet where you, the consumer, kind of like cable, like how you watch TV right now. You pay a minimum package for a small number of channels. You can pay for more channels and more channels and more channels. What if internet companies start doing that with the internet? And are you afraid that they might do this, or are you unconcerned by this at all?
I love the fear mongering on this, right?
Why is this fear mongering? These are the same exact companies operating. With cable, they've presented these packages because this is maximum profit for them for their business model. Yeah. What's to say that they won't do the same with the internet? That here's your deal. You can have the basic internet where you get these small amount of websites plus the content we, the internet service provider, own. You can have all that you want. But if you want Netflix or something else, you have to pay more. If you want left-wing websites like my website, you have to pay more for that. That seems like a new development that people will not be happy with.
Do I want a consumer demand-driven internet, or do I want an internet that's driven by the 28-year-old bureaucrat sitting behind a desk deciding what website should come before another?
That's not the way it's working, though.
No, actually it is.
The 28-year-old bureaucrat is saying you can't make one website over the other.
That's correct.
It's the ISPs that want to do that.
You're making my point for me. The fact is that the 28-year-old is saying that email traffic needs to work as fast as Skype traffic, which in fact breaks the internet. So Skype traffic has to have a perfect flow to it. Email traffic, on the other hand, or the packets can ping back because you don't need all of your email packets to hit your inbox at one time. Skype, on the other hand, if it has a skip, has a problem. And so different internet businesses need different internet traffic. It's just kind of like going down the street commuting here. There is an HOV lane. You can pay to get in it. It helps the speed of traffic in both lanes when you have the HOV lane. But that's still beyond the point because that's not what we've seen in internet traffic. We see consumers have demanded the traffic.
But we did start to see that developing before the net neutrality rules came into place. You started seeing Comcast basically hold Netflix hostage until they paid them more money to be able to have fast lane access.
That's actually
to consumers.
Completely and totally wrong. Netflix was no. Check out the news stories on this. Netflix was throttling their customers without telling them, while advocating for net neutrality. And on top of that, when they finally admitted it, they then kind of changed it. But Netflix was the one that was doing the throttling, and nobody else was. Throttling isn't something that benefits the major ISPs. The fact is that people like a fair and open internet. The major ISP companies support neutrality. They just don't support heavy-handed government regulation.
AT&T blocked FaceTime on iPhones in 2012, claiming it was too much bandwidth. AT&T had a different service that they wanted people to use instead of FaceTime. That seems like another example where you'll have internet service providers basically offering their own certain service and denying their competitor service on those, to quote Ted Stevens, tubes.
Well, I hate quibbling about words, but the fact is tubes is what most of the people that use internet talk about. They're like, they want a bigger pipeline in there. We've talked about pipelines into this studio before, but also we've already proven Netflix is wrong. So we're talking about this one incident of AT&T throttling, and it was highly publicized and hurt their demand. That's the type of thing that increases the demand for a company like Google to come in and compete with them.
So you don't think this is a problem at all? You don't see companies down the road treating the internet like they treat television cable, like they treat cable packages? Or do you see that and not have a problem with it? I'm not quite sure.
I don't support a 28-year-old sitting behind a desk in government deciding what investment should be made.
There's no 28-year-old. That's a mystery here. I mean, that's a red herring here. We're chasing someone that doesn't exist.
There's no 28-year-olds working in government that doesn't exist.
There's not some all-powerful 28-year-old who's determining internet policy right now. There's a guy, IG Pie, who wears an oversized suit who's determining net neutrality policy right now.
Well, at least you gave him the oversized suit instead of the attacks that he's getting based on his ethnicity and his race from the left right now. So, I mean,
I haven't seen any of those, but I have seen the 2.9 million comments that have been lodged on the FCC in support of net neutrality, because we did just have this fight in 2015. We had a commission that went through the proper process. They solicited public comment. They went through the rulemaking process. It was voted on. It was done. And 2 years later, we're revisiting this entire fight and doing the same thing, and the public comments are saying the same exact thing. The only thing that came in support were 450,000 comments to the FCC website in support of IGPI. That turns out they were all fake comments from bots.
Look at the background of these numbers. That they were those reports are, if they're from the left, they were real people, and if they're from the right, they were bots. And which is untrue. The left and right can both use forms, and the forms have the same effect depending on what your political background is when you look at them. But if you look at the reports from the left, they're not all. A lot of them are going after Ajit Pai and his background, besides the fact that they have the funny names to go along with them.
I was just looking up here, by the way, the Free State Foundation has ties to the American Legislative Exchange Council, which lefties who know or listening know about. When they hear ALEC, that's kind of like the giant boogeyman. So, I mean, it has tons of corporate lobbyists who work for it. They write legislation. Something tells me that their numbers might be a little bit different than what, say, Free Press or something might come out. And Free Press has shown that investments in broadband have continued to increase since 2015 when the net neutrality rules were passed.
I just don't see that that's the way that it makes sense. A nonprofit think tank that is supported by
with industry ties,
with industry knowledge. Maybe, but if you want research from people that don't know what they're talking about, then maybe not having industry ties is a good thing. I guess that's the way the left does science.
I think we've gotten into the weeds a lot with this debate here, but my ultimate point is we are living in this dystopic world that you imagine with net neutrality. We're living in it. We've been living in it for the last 2 years. And I don't know one internet consumer who has a problem with how they can access the traffic. And I know a lot of people who'd have a problem if 10 years from now they suddenly have to have tiered access to various websites.
Hey,
I'll give you the last word in 10 seconds.
The left wants to support one set of cronies, and I want the market to work.
Charles Sauer, self-identified libertarian. He's also an economist and president at the Market Institute. Follow him on Twitter at Charles Sauer and at Market Institute. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We've got a lot of your calls lined up here. I'm going to start getting to them one by one right after this break.
This woman is saying some really cool stuff. M-U-S-C-A-T-O, Danielle Moscato. She says, this is to Donald Trump in response to his tweeting about Saturday Night Live, right? She said, do you know how many children went to bed tonight without enough food to eat? Do you even care? What is wrong with you? No, of course you don't know these things. You don't even know what a blind trust is, and you call yourself a businessman. You're pathetic. You ran for president for attention. You're a fake, a fraud. You never wanted to win anyway. We can all see it. You're not fooling anyone. You're scared and overwhelmed, and you have absolutely no idea what you're doing, and it shows. You think you're all that we're all too polite, too aghast to call you out. I see through you, Donnie. I'm calling you out. You're a joke. With every fiber of my being, I'm disgusted by you. And you know what the real secret is? You're disgusted by you, too, she's saying to Donald Trump. That's why you surround yourself with gold and beautiful women that you objectify. You know you're a loser, so you try to make yourself feel better, feel successful, authoritative with things. Money. You're an imposter. You're a fraud. I'm ashamed of you. The world is ashamed. You spout nonsense. Millions of illegal voters? Even you don't believe it. It's absurd. You think we're stupid? You think we don't know what you're doing? Trying to control the narrative, get your followers to distrust the media, the polls, news reporters, so that they must turn to you for what's true, what's real? There's a name for that. It's called propaganda. We know what you're doing. We will not allow you to suppress votes with this nonsense. We will not allow you to trample our civil rights. We will not allow you to destroy the progress we've made. We will resist. I call upon progressives, Democrats, independents, and Republicans to resist, #resist fascism, resist Donald Trump, resist crony capitalism, resist hypocrisy.
When Donald Trump lies, acknowledge and call it out as propaganda. When he tests boundaries, acknowledge and call it out as fascism. Resist. We cannot wait and see. Real Donald Trump is telling us here and now what he's going to do. Believe him. Millions of illegal votes is not a claim about reality, despite what Donald Trump's pretense. It is a warning, a threat. Pay attention. Resist. Donald Trump is telling us he'll suppress our votes. Our democracy is at stake. We cannot wait, let him enact policy, then whine. We must resist. Donald Trump tweets so that we forget that his kids will run a company in a so-called blind trust while sitting in on diplomatic meetings. Trump tweets so we forget that he's stacking his cabinets with the very same people he proposed to remove from his influence. Trump tweets so we ignore that he's clueless at governance. The more outrageous his tweets, the harder it is for us to keep up. We see you, Donald. We know exactly what you're doing. It's not working on us. You're a disgrace and you should be ashamed. The next 4 years will be brutal for me and my fellow civil rights activists. Not all of us will survive, but we will resist. We will resist Donald Trump till racist police are imprisoned. We will resist till full equality for women. We will resist. We are ready. We will resist until abortion is accessible to everyone who needs it, until LGBTQ are safe and healthy, until people of color are safe. Donald Trump, you can fight us on it, and you are and you will, but you will lose because history is on our side. We may not live to see it, but we know we will win. We will fight you every step, so be ready. You can't stop progress no matter how hard you try. I hear in her voice the echo of Sophie Scholl, who, along with her brother, started in Nazi Germany in the 40s, the White Rose Society, which was the resistance movement against Hitler, the student resistance movement against Hitler.
Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Sam Sachs, still here, still filling in. And we've got Albert on the line from Charlestown, New Hampshire. Hey, what's up, Albert?
Hey, Sam, you're doing a great job this hour.
Thanks.
I was going to scare you about technology for bombs, but then you had that guest on. So if you don't mind, I'll switch gears.
All right.
I worked for a company purchased by Lucent, and then I worked for another company, and they made similar equipment for the core of the Internet. One was closed by Lucent, and one died on the vine when the funding dried up at the dot-com era. One of those was backed by the same guy out of Concord, Mass., who's trying to block, claim Social Security is making everybody bankrupt, or the government bankrupt. Can't think of his name.
Pete Peterson?
Anyway, say again?
Pete Peterson?
Pete Peterson, thank you very much. Met him in an elevator.
Nice one, Troy.
Real scumbag.
Yeah.
Yeah, he is. This whole thing about the Internet and the fact that, the market's going to decide, we were companies that were looking at the basic building of infrastructure, just like bridges and roads that Eisenhower did, to provide broadband across the country. And it was a good idea when we did it for phone. It's an even better idea if we do it for Internet, because the next genius may come out of a rural town in somewhere in America.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good...
That funding...
Go ahead, Albert.
Well, that funding was dried up by the very people who would rather control what we think. And also, they love to control the commons for the profit, and that means wiring places with high density levels of population like New York. So the cost versus their profits are very high. If you tell them they've also got to wire rural America, their profits can still be profitable because we always carry companies. We carry nuclear power plants. We always carry the semi-utilities or the monopolies. Let's put it that way.
So, Albert, in just the last minute we've got here, someone who knows the industry, I mean, if they got rid of net neutrality rules, do you think you'd see ISPs rushing to carve up the Internet as quickly as they could?
Yes, I think that it would be the worst nightmare from 1984, where your TV could see you and your content would be limited. It this quality of service that he was talking about, that was when he claimed that Skype and email shouldn't go at the same speed. I agree, but that's already handled by what's called quality of service, QoS, and it just what's the word? It designates the priority of packets. Everything is packet switched on the internet. Everything comes at different speeds, Skype or not. There's no such thing as a one connection, because that makes the internet vulnerable. It's switched all over the place, and that's a good thing. So what you can do if you own the infrastructure is say that NBC News is now getting through, even though everyone else has access to that same throughput. They are merely slowed down because of their content or who they are or where they originate.
Interesting.
I should have bad news for us.
Yeah, I should have had you in studio with me when I was debating Charles here to shoot down that point he made.
Well, again, I wasn't on the phone for that reason. I was on the phone for another, so there's no way you could have known. But yeah, I'd be happy to give you what other details I know offline or otherwise.
All right. Well, you can find me on Twitter at Sam Sachs Albert if you want to shoot me a message with those details. But thanks for calling in. I learned something from you there. I really appreciate it. We're going to take another quick break here, and then we've got more of your calls coming up.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
The last half hour of the Thom Hartmann Program, hosted by me, Sam Sachs, coming up after this.
Welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. We're reading from Death in the Pines, a novel set in Vermont. You have to be crazy to do this. On a morning when the Vermont winter sun shone pale and weak across 6 crisp inches of fresh snow, when the temperature hovered somewhere between 20 and 25 degrees Fahrenheit, I spent a long time searching for 10 stones. They had to be the right stones, of a certain weight and shape, heavy but not so heavy they exhausted me, rounded but not so much that they would roll from the place I set them. It took hours to find all 10 of them, searching in the sheltered places where the dry, powdery snow was easier to scrape aside. But then they had to be lugged to the spot I had selected, mindless beast of burden work that made me sweat inside my downline jacket. I stacked the stones carefully into a hollow, truncated pyramid. Anyone coming across that pile of stones in 10 or 100 years would know they weren't dropped there haphazardly by a retreating glacier. This was a made thing, too small to be a cairn, too insignificant to be the remnants of a wall. I guess you could call it an altar. The ashes were in a bronze urn, far too small to contain the spirit of my friend John Lincoln. The container had stood on the shelf in my cabin for too many months. The new year had just arrived, and with it a belated first snowfall of the season, and the combination of the two had finally persuaded me it was time to do something about the urn. Holding it in the chill, near silence of the forest, I stood over the structure I'd made and looked off into the distance, seeing but not seeing the brownish shafts of pines streaked with snow, the bare gray trunks of maples, the white and gray columns of birch, the deep-shaded greens of white-burdened firs. At that moment, the urn felt heavier than the stones themselves. This was why I was here. The mind drifts at such times. Even after 6 years, I could recall the particular night that had caused me to travel to this place. On that night, my mentor, no, by that time my friend, John and I had been slumped in the rotting front seat of an ancient rusting 55 Ford, parked in the heavy, humid midnight of Central America. Despite the choking reek of insect repellent, voracious mosquitoes whined in through the open windows, and from time to time we slapped an offender, reducing it to a crumble of tissue to be flicked off with a fingertip. Still warmer than blood heat even at that hour. The dark air sizzled with cicadas. We had left our home base in Atlanta a week before and had taken a circuitous route to this dark clearing hacked from the jungle. We were waiting for either 3 or 4 men to emerge from a blacked-out warehouse, and we had no idea whether those men knew we were watching or how well they might be armed. What we would do depended on how many came out. If only 3, we'd move in and recover what had been stolen. 4 would make the recovery problematic, because that would mean that at least one of the men would be a local, complicating the calculus of violence.
As I stood over the stone altar, every detail of our conversation went through my mind. A tape rewound and replayed. By that point in our lives, John and I had been partners for so long that we didn't BS each other, had no need to strain for machismo, no use for phony heartiness. We were a good team. We could finish each other's sentences, catch body language signals that amounted to a silent code, recognize unspoken concerns and anxieties in time to be prepared for the unexpected. We told all our jokes to each other years before. Once in a while, one of us might mutter 2 or 3 words of a punchline. The other would chuckle in appreciation or exasperation as the mood took him. That night, in stop and start fashion, we had each spoke of good times we'd had. Waiting in the dark gave each of us a natural urge to talk. That was the one and only time that John had spoken of his quiet way in the forested hills of Vermont, thinking of the coolness of a New England autumn in that hellish tropic night. I'd never known that he'd been to Vermont. He had lived in Buckhead, a suburb of Atlanta, the whole time I'd known and worked with him. But in those suffocating hours of darkness, cool green Vermont was on his mind. Beautiful place, very peaceful, he said. I'd like to go back there when it's all over. I didn't have time to ask what he meant or what would be over. The job, the summer, the career, the life. At that moment, dim yellow light from a kerosene lantern appeared on the black face of the warehouse. First a line, then a thin rectangle, then a fat square as the 3 men inside pushed open the double doors. John and I climbed out of our borrowed car and did our job. In the 6 years that followed that night, John never had gone back to Vermont, had never spoken of it again. And now for him, it really was all over. After the memorial service, after the will was probated, I didn't feel like hanging around Atlanta. So I made arrangements, gave most of my liquid assets to a community for abused kids in New Hampshire, and bought a cabin on 200 acres in the woods of Vermont. It was here I'd brought my old friend to the place he'd talked about. Pondering the finality of it all, I held the urn containing his ashes, a few bone fragments and pieces of his teeth, ready to fulfill a promise I had never made. Such a time demands words. I took a deep breath of icy air and looked up toward the top of a towering birch. A squirrel made an untidy, tangled nest up there in the highest branches, and the animal itself, or maybe another squirrel, who could tell, hung below the nest, head down in the trunk, apparently gazing at me. I imagined the squirrel's bright black eye held accusation. The fall had gone on so long, probably for half the animal's lifetime. So what was the idea of all this snow? Was I to blame? Clearing my throat, I reached far back into memory, groping for the prayers I had last recited as a child. I heard myself say, "Dear God." My words took flight toward the washed-out sky on puffs of vapor. As far as I could tell, no one heard them but me and the squirrel. My voice had a harsh tone even to my own ears, a rusty hinge catch. The book is Death in the Pines. It's an Oakley Tyler novel based in Vermont. Hey, want to hear that clip again? Subscribe to the Thom Hartmann Program on YouTube to see all your favorite show highlights. All the important stories we cover and the issues we care about are at hartmanreport.com. Members of our community can comment and join the conversation.
And welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Sam Sachs filling in. Tough day for ExxonMobil here. A historic surprise vote is how The Guardian is characterizing it among shareholders today. 62% of ExxonMobil shareholders voted for a resolution against Exxon's management that will require the company to inform investors more about how climate change is affecting Exxon's bottom line. This comes, Exxon is the subject of an inquiry about whether or not it misled investors, considering the company had data dating back decades about climate change and how their business model is affecting climate change and how that might affect their business model, and yet never informed shareholders about it. So last year, the same exact proposal was put up for a vote. Only 38% of shareholders supported the move to require ExxonMobil to be more transparent about climate change and what it knows. This year, that number jumped to 62%. It, of course, comes the day that reports are out that Trump might take the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Agreement. I have a feeling we'll be talking more about this story on tomorrow's show, so stay tuned for that. Meanwhile, on today's show, let's get to some more listener calls. About Leonard calling from South Pasadena, California. Hey, Leonard, what's up?
Oh, how you doing there, Tom? It's good to talk to you.
Good. Sam here, not Tom, but that's okay.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm Sam, filling in for Tom today. But that's
yes, you are, and doing a wonderful job, too.
Thanks, Leonard.
Well, anyway, I just want to talk a little bit about greed and capitalism.
Yeah.
Morality is just too expensive for the capitalists. That's why they don't consider morality. You can get a whole lot richer if you pay no attention to morality and just follow the money.
Yeah.
And, I think what must be happening here is we need the needs of the people must be handled by the people, so we not get burned by these tremendous people who are only interested in money. That's all they're interested in. And I sometimes get the impression that the Democratic Party is taking a dive because, well, there's a lot of neoliberals in there, and they're interested in money.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've been ranting about it all show here about the Democrats and how they need to fight a little bit stronger on these issues. But I'm glad you brought up neoliberalism because it's important here. And it gets to this idea of morality and greed. With the rise of neoliberalism and this idea that we need to focus more on market-based solutions, let the market control more aspects of our economy, get the government out of the way, those sort of things. And as you noted, it's an ideology that's been largely bought into by both Republicans and Democrats. I mean, the Clintons are neoliberals. Much of the Democratic Party believes in market-based solutions to a number of our economic problems here in the U.S. Problem is there's no room for morality in this debate. You basically export all decisions out to a market which has no consideration of morality, simply is about returning investments for shareholders and everything like that, and increasing profits on a quarterly basis, year over year over year. Where is the moral calculation in any of this anymore? Markets are dominating what we do, and there is no moral component anymore. And I think that kind of gets to what you were saying there, Leonard, about how nobody cares about morality anymore.
Exactly. I just want to say one thing.
Sure.
I think we should hire someone to take all the T's off of Trump's buildings.
Just have rump towers everywhere?
Yeah, I mean, we got an ass in the White House.
Thank you for that, Leonard. All right, let's go to Jeff. Jeff is calling from San Francisco, California. Hey, Jeff, what's up?
Hey, Sam. Thanks for filling in.
Yeah.
Great job. I was wanting to talk about, I just almost finished with Ellen Brown's book, Web of Debt. And I think every college student should have to read this, even high school. Because it just spells out how bad we've been getting screwed by corporatists and the banks for centuries now, and how we could simply rectify this by creating a national bank or state banks, such as North Dakota's had for over 100 years. And I've gone to 2 town hall meetings trying to press my legislators to get this on the bill in California. Because I think one of our hopes, and it's not too haughty, but is California, because we're going for single payer. And I think the next thing we need to go for is a state bank. And I don't know. I call in all the time and ask about this, and I'm going to start going down to to colleges and saying, hey, do you want to start paying 1% on your student loans? Start forming a state bank.
Well,
and we could do that tomorrow.
Yeah.
And,
this is an important issue to raise hell about, Jeff. I mean, banking needs to be turned back into a public utility. It needs to become a boring service like it used to be. Just, people with visors just counting the money, giving the money out. Now it's become this high-stakes casino, which you have investment firms and saving banks joining together, taking people's savings, gambling with it on Wall Street. Banks should be a public utility. They grease the economy. They ensure that the economy runs here. And another great option would be postal banking. Let post offices get in the game of offering free checking accounts and check cashing services like that. I think that would do a number on Wall Street's, grip on the economy and its sort of reckless behavior. And Jeff, I'm glad you mentioned the California healthcare single payer bill. That's extremely important. I saw a friend of mine in California post on Facebook a picture of St. Basil's Church, and it says Russia. And it's like, okay, now that I have your attention, there's a very important issue about single-payer healthcare in California that everybody needs to focus on. Thanks for the call, Jeff. All right, let's go in order here. Mark's been waiting on hold for quite a while, calling from San Francisco, California. Hey, Mark, thanks for staying on hold. What's up?
No problem, Sam. I wanted to just talk about these Republican policies on the health care and their tax policy plans.
Yeah.
You know, this is all just a transfer of wealth. All their policies are transfers of wealth from the middle class and poor to the rich. And people need to be screaming about what this Republican Party is doing to us. And make it loud and clear that that's what they're all about. They're not about helping this country. They're not about improving anything. And the ugly result of it, like Donald said, is going to be devastation to the middle class and the poor, which probably will end up in a depression. And if that's what the Democrats think that's what it's going to take for them to get in office, that's a sorry state of affairs.
Yeah, the health care bill is not a health care bill. It's a tax cut for the rich. It's a bailout for health insurance companies. That's what it is. Let's not pretend this has anything to do about offering care to people. The Republicans don't care about offering health care to people. They care about giving tax cuts to rich people and making sure health insurance companies are increasing their profit over and over again. What we've witnessed over the last several decades since neoliberalism and Reaganism took over is one of the largest transfers of wealth ever, from the working class and the middle class to the top 1%, to the upper echelon of wealthy Americans. And you brought up how it's going to lead to a depression or a crash, and you're absolutely right. It's not just greed. It's not just creating wealth inequality. It's creating an unstable economy because you're taking the demand and purchasing power that used to exist in the middle class and in the working class, which includes a lot more Americans buying stuff, having purchasing power, and you're moving it all the way to the 1% where there's not that many Americans, and they can't compensate for that loss of purchasing power. A billionaire is not going to buy a billion pairs of pants. He's going to buy the same amount of pants, maybe a few pairs more than the working class person who needs pants. But the billionaire is not going to go and go out to dinner 8 times every night. So look, you need the working class and the middle class to have purchasing power to drive our economy. And if you take their wealth, they don't have the purchasing power, and demand collapses, and so does our economy. Thanks for the call, Mark. Next up, we've got Bob. Bob is calling from South Dennis, Massachusetts, and you want to talk about DAPL?
Yes, Sam, a couple, I think, things that the listeners will like to check out. First is a fairly recent report from Jordan Shuritan of TYT Politics. He interviewed a reporter from The Intercept who really did huge investigative work, finding that the FBI worked with a private mercenary group battling the water protectors who were just brutalized, before, Trump stopped the environmental study. And that's another whole thing. I don't know if your listeners know that Senator Carper and Senator Cantwell sent a letter to the Army Corps of Engineers asking for information why that study that President Obama put in place was stopped. We knew that Trump ordered it, and then obviously the head of the Army Corps immediately said, nope, Energy Transfer Partners, go right ahead. So I have followed up with both the senators. They have not heard back from the Army Corps of Engineers. No surprise there. But I urge listeners to please contact Senator Carper from Delaware, Senator Cantwell from Washington. You can go online to their .gov sites, and please encourage them to have more follow-up. I know they're busy people, but this is such an important issue. On the same subject as DAPL, there's an important whistleblower from Enbridge, which is the pipeline company based out of Canada that is part of so many of these dreadful projects. His name's John Bolenbaugh, Bolenbaughh. He's got an extraordinary documentary on YouTube. And I think any of the listeners who are concerned about the atrocities committed against Indigenous people and supporters of people trying to stop this craziness will really get a lot out of it. And I appreciate a chance just to share that information, Sam.
Yeah, Bob, thanks for the call. And I mean, it is inconvenient to note, though, that a lot of the crackdown on DAPL protesters happened while Barack Obama was president last year. It did ultimately push him to put a hold on the pipeline and call for this study to happen. that we, as you noted, Trump has put a halt to, and we're trying to figure out exactly why. What's the justification for that? Extremely important fight happening that was happening up in the Dakotas, just like the Keystone XL fight, the DAPL fight. These were things that people power activism looked like they had won. They had pressured the lawmakers here, but unfortunately, it took Trump a week, 2 weeks, a few months in office to just sign an executive order, and all those victories were washed away just like that. So people need to stay vigilant. Just because Trump is in power doesn't mean it's time to give up. Now, more than ever, people need to be taking to the streets, marching, and trying to protect our planet, because we know Trump isn't going to do it.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
I'm not going anywhere yet. We've got some time left in the show and more calls to get to, so stick around.
And Barbara in St. Paul, Minnesota. Hey, Barbara, thanks for watching Free Speech. What's up?
Hey, Tom, how are you doing today?
I'm fine.
You know what? I watched this election go, and 3 weeks ago, I knew how it was going to go.
Yeah.
Because I knew what some parts of America wanted.
Well, I knew it was possible, and throughout this election, I got a note from another talk show host over the weekend titled Apology, and he said, when I had you on my show a couple of months ago, and you said that it was possible that Trump could win, I was absolutely shocked, and I never believed it, and you were right. And I take no, and I've been saying that all along. It's why I've been, pushing people to get out and vote for Clinton, even though she wasn't my first choice, because I thought that Trump actually had a good chance of winning. I mean, I know Middle America. I grew up in Michigan. Back to you, Barbara. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
Excuse me. Here's one thing that I really want America to pay attention to. When people say the popular vote don't count, yes, it does. For as far as I'm concerned, Donald Trump is not my president. I will never call him President Trump.
Yeah.
His band of bigots that run with him, that's their problem. But the people that voted for Donald Trump, they are fixing to find out the hard way. And I'm not going to feel sorry for him.
Yeah.
Second of all, I praise my president, Barack Hussein Obama, for the dignity, the grace, and the honor that he showed to a man that demeaned him every step of the way. This is why the man has a Nobel Peace Prize. See, America doesn't know this about our president. Donald Trump is going to try to use some of his programs and make them his. Mitch McConnell is smiling. Paul Ryan is smiling. But I'm here to tell them, we are America. I am black. I'm not scared of any man, with a sheet or without a sheet.
Good on
Do
you.
not walk up on me and go to talking out the side of your head, because I'm not going to take it. I'm an American. My father fought for this country. My brother fought for this country. My uncle fought for this country. I am an American, and you're not going to tell me what I can and cannot say, and you're not going to tell me that I can and cannot protest. To the children of America, keep marching. Don't quit marching. Keep marching. Let this man know, no.
Yeah, I'm completely with you. In fact, I had intended to open the show by talking about the marches all over the country, and I got mentally derailed. I've got to get back to that as soon as the break is over, or at the next break. But I think you're absolutely right, Barbara, and obviously you're a courageous person. Good on you for saying it.
I mean it with all my heart. I literally mean it with all my heart. Yeah. This is my doggone country.
Yeah.
And no plutocrat or whatever they want to call themselves is going to stand and tell me how I can and can't live in my country.
Yeah.
God bless America. America's great, and America, keep fighting.
Yeah.
Keep fighting on. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Barbara. Well said. Well said. And this is what I'm calling on Chuck Schumer to do, is to say no to everything they bring forward. It's going to take 60 votes to pass anything through this, or it should. This is. Keep in mind, for the last 8 years, and the press never even commented on this, by the way. The extension of long-term unemployment insurance. It had enough votes to pass the Senate, but it was filibustered by the Republicans. The press didn't even mention. They just said, "Oh, they failed to hit the 60-vote limit." Now, when the Democrats do that, is the press going to say, oh, the Democrats filibustered it? I'm guessing they probably will, because our press in this country is largely right-wing and Republican. Believe that.
And we're in the home stretch here of the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Sam Sachs, filling in, and let me just say I've had a great time being able to talk to you all today. I hope you all have had as much fun as I've had, and I'm actually going to be here tomorrow too. So we've got that to look forward to. All right, let's get to the calls again. We've got about 5 more minutes here. Patty, calling from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Hey, Patty.
Hey, Sam. I have a question. I'm not sure how it could be answered, but by what mechanism could we get back all of our infrastructure, our roads, our internet, our water resources, the national parks? They're going to be fracking them, our forests. When we have private investors and foreign investors buying them all up or having them auctioned off to them, basically. Back before the revolution, there were King's Roads and tolls, and if we end up turning these all over to private companies, how do we get our forests back when they're clear cut?
We don't. That's the problem. That's the scary thing. What do we do about it? Well, we have to start pressuring lawmakers to pass more legislation to protect our commons, to give us more control over our commons. I mean, in a way, net neutrality does that when it comes to the internet, at least ensuring that private companies can't screw up the commons that we consider the internet as it is. Another, and this one is a pretty far out there idea, but you hear a lot of calls for a new constitutional convention of some sort or adding amendments. You know, an amendment to the Constitution that gives personhood to the environment, to nature, that gives rights to, you know, bodies of water and forests. And once you can do that, you can prevent companies from ruining those environments if they have rights just like those companies have, just like we have. And they should. They should be preserved for future generations. And you saw the Bundy Ranch people flip out about, and you see the militia movement flip out about government owning too much public land around the country. Well, if the government were to get out of the business of owning that public land, because they're in the business now to steward it, if they were to get out of that business, it would be immediately sold to some chemical company, some fracking company, and within 10 years, that landscape would be completely destroyed. So as much as these Bundy Ranch and militia folks are upset by the government owning these lands, just wait until a chemical company gets a hold of them and ruins the pasture that you wanted your cows to graze on or whatever. Patty, hopefully that provided some direction on how to solve this problem. Thanks for the call. All right, calling now from Ramona, California. We've got Conrad on the line. Hey, Conrad, what's up?
Hi, taking you off speaker. I'm begging all progressives out there to never use the word Social Security cap again. Use the word rich man's loophole. Rich man's loophole. Keep repeating it. That's what it is.
You're right, Conrad. I did call it the Social Security cap earlier today. I should call it the rich man's loophole. That's exactly what it is. Rich people are paying a much smaller percentage of their income towards Social Security than poor people are. That's a big problem. And at this time when we're talking about Social Security going bankrupt, which it's not, but if we wanted to put Social Security on a more sustainable path going forward, the best thing we could do, raise the cap, get rid of the cap, get rid of the rich man's loophole, as you call it. All right, now let's go to, let's see, Sonia, calling from Redding, California. Hey, Sonia.
Hi. What I was calling about is the interstate cross-check, and I've heard that one way to combat it would be to get the National Compact to vote. But what I was wondering is if, in the meantime, if there could be more of an emphasis on making sure that these voters that may be possibly taken off the rolls, I don't know if this could be done through volunteers or paid persons. If someone could have the voters check in like either 3 months before election or whatever the time period is where someone could be taken off the rolls and not put back on the rolls.
Yeah.
I think this needs to be attacked like right at the source.
Yeah.
Because according to Greg Palast, with Kansas and all that, it's tied up in criminal courts, so it could take years before there's any, judicial oversight on cross-check. So I was wondering what you think about this idea.
Yeah, it's a good idea dealing with what we have to deal with, but ultimately that's another burden that voters have to go through, which might suppress the vote in the future. Cross-check needs to be ended. The people behind it need to be charged with crimes because their intent was to get rid of voters, not find voter fraud. This is a very serious issue. Thanks for the call, though. Okay, we have reached the end of the show here pretty much today. Just give you a couple more information. Check out my website, districtsentinel.com. It's a watchdog news outlet based here in Washington, D.C. Also, check out my daily podcast, District Sentinel Radio. It's a daily newscast for leftists out there. Find out what Washington, D.C. is up to every Monday through Thursday night. You can download the podcast on iTunes by searching for District Sentinel Radio. And you can help fund all those operations by checking out patreon.com/District Sentinel. All sorts of goodies for subscribers over there. Thank you so much for listening. I've had a ball. I'll be here tomorrow as well. I hope you stick around. Thanks.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242.
Or visit tomsbeets.com.